Welcome, fierce souls, to a world where power isn't just taken, it's commanded, respected, and earned through blood and bone. Tonight, you'll meet an alpha who has ruled his domain with an iron fist for over a decade, a man whose mere presence can silence a room full of the most dangerous predators on Earth. Cade Blackthorne has never met a challenge he couldn't conquer, a rival he couldn't crush, or a soul he couldn't bend to his will. Until tonight. Tonight, fate delivers him a woman who looks him dead in the eye and says the two words no one has dared speak to him in years. Hell no. Everything he thought he knew about dominance, about leadership, about himself, it's all about to change. Because sometimes, the greatest alpha needs someone strong enough to stand beside him as an equal, not kneel before him as a subject. Are you ready to witness what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? When an alpha's world is turned upside down by the one woman brave enough to challenge his reign? Then let the hunt begin. Chapter 1. The scent of fear hung thick in the air of the Blackthorne Pack's council chamber, mixing with the cedar and leather that permeated every corner of Cade Blackthorne's territory. 20 of the most powerful werewolves in the Pacific Northwest sat around the mahogany table, their eyes downcast, shoulders tense with barely suppressed submission. Not one of them dared to meet the gaze of the man who stood at the head of the table like a king surveying his court. Cade Blackthorne was 6'4" of pure, lethal muscle wrapped in a $1,000 suit that did nothing to soften his predatory edges. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but his amber eyes, wolf eyes, even in human form, burned with an intensity that made grown men shift uncomfortably in their seats. At 32, he had ruled the largest pack on the West Coast for 12 years, ever since he'd challenged and defeated his own father in ritual combat the day after his 20th birthday. Gentlemen, Cade's voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, commanding attention without effort. We have a problem. Marcus Webb, his beta and oldest friend, cleared his throat carefully. The Morrison Pack is still refusing to acknowledge our territorial expansion into.
No.
The single word cracked like a whip, and Marcus immediately fell silent. The Morrison Pack is not our problem. They're gnats. Irritating, but ultimately inconsequential. Cade's fingers drummed once against the polished wood, and the sound might as well have been gunshots for how the other wolves flinched. Our problem is that someone in this room thinks they can make decisions about my pack without consulting me first. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cade slowly walked around the table, his footsteps deliberate and measured. Each pack member he passed kept their eyes firmly fixed on the table, their wolves recognizing the apex predator in their midst. Yesterday, Cade continued, his voice deceptively calm, I discovered that 3 of our established hunting routes have been altered. New boundaries have been drawn. New patrol schedules implemented. All without my knowledge or approval. He paused behind the chair of David Chen, a younger pack member who had been rising quickly through the ranks. Care to explain, David? David's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he lifted his head. Alpha, the changes were just minor efficiency improvements. I thought. You thought. Cade's hand came down on David's shoulder, not hard enough to cause damage, but with enough pressure to make his point crystal clear. That's where you went wrong.
You don't think, David.
I think. You follow. That's how a pack survives. Yes, Alpha, David whispered, his voice barely audible. Cade squeezed once, a reminder of the strength that could crush bone with barely any effort, then released him.
Good.
Now, let's discuss the real reason we're here tonight. He moved back to the head of the table, and every pair of eyes in the room tracked his movement like prey watching a circling hawk. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The Silva Moon Corporation has made an offer for the timber rights on our eastern territory. The money is significant. Enough to expand our operations into 3 new states, enough to cement our position as the dominant pack in the region for the next century. A ripple of interest ran through the council, but no one spoke without permission. However, Cade continued, accepting their offer would mean allowing humans onto our land, into our sacred spaces. It would mean compromise. He let that word hang in the air like a blade. And, as you all know, I don't compromise. What are alternatives, Alpha? This from Elena Rodriguez, one of his few female council members and the PAC's lead enforcer. She was one of the few who could speak without explicit permission, a privilege she'd earned through loyalty and competence. We take what we need, Cade replied simply. Silver Moon has been expanding aggressively into territories that rightfully belong to supernatural communities. They've pushed 3 smaller PACs off their ancestral lands in the past year alone. It's time someone pushed back. The wolves around the table exchanged glances. They knew that tone, that look in their alpha's eyes. It meant war, and when Cade Blackthorne went to war, he didn't lose. Marcus, I want a full intelligence report on Silver Moon's operations within 48 hours. Elena, coordinate with our allies in the Rocky Mountain Alliance. If we're going to move against a corporation this size, we'll need to ensure our flanks are protected. Cade's commands came sharp and fast, and his people responded with immediate acknowledgement. What about the Morrison PAC? Asked James Sullivan, the PAC's treasurer. If they think we're distracted by Silver Moon, they might try to reclaim some of the territory we took last year. Cade's smile was all teeth, no warmth. Let them try. It would save me the trouble of hunting them down myself. The meeting continued for another hour, with Cade issuing orders and expectations with the precision of a military commander. His PAC members responded with the kind of instant obedience that spoke to both respect and fear, the perfect combination for maintaining absolute control. As the last of the council members filed out of the chamber, Marcus lingered behind. You sure about this, Cade? Taking on a corporation like Silver Moon, it's not like fighting other PACs. They have human law on their side, government connections. Cade loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar, allowing his beta to see the man behind the alpha mask, a privilege granted to very few. When have we ever let human law stop us from protecting what's ours? Never, Marcus admitted. But this feels different. Bigger.
Good.
Cade moved to the window that looked out over his territory, thousands of acres of pristine wilderness that his PAC had protected for generations. We've grown comfortable, Marcus. Complacent. A real challenge will remind everyone why the Blackthorne PAC stands above all others. Marcus nodded, though concern still creased his features. And if Silver Moon proves more difficult than expected? Cade's reflection in the window showed eyes that burned with amber fire. Then they'll learn what happens to anything that threatens my PAC. I've never met an enemy I couldn't crush, Marcus. I don't intend to start now. As his beta left to carry out his orders, Cade remained at the window, his mind already working through strategies and contingencies. In 12 years of leadership, he had never faced a challenge he couldn't overcome through strength, cunning, and sheer force of will. He had built an empire on the simple principle that power respected only greater power, and he had made himself the apex predator in a world full of dangerous beasts. Tomorrow, he would begin dismantling Silver Moon Corporation piece by piece. He would show them, and any other threats to his territory, that some boundaries should never be crossed. But first, he needed to review the intelligence reports on Silver Moon's key personnel. Know your enemy, his father had taught him. Find their weaknesses, their pressure points, their fears. Cade moved to his private office, settling behind a desk that had been carved from a single piece of ancient oak. He opened the secure files that Marcus had compiled, scanning through executive profiles and corporate hierarchies with the focused attention of a hunter studying his prey. His finger stopped on one particular file, and something cold settled in his stomach. The photograph showed a woman with striking green eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her expression was professional, but there was something in her gaze that set his wolf on edge, a challenge, a defiance that he recognized instinctively. Dr. Aria Thorne, Silver Moon's Director of Environmental Impact Assessment. The woman responsible for evaluating whether supernatural territories were suitable for corporate development. Cade stared at the photograph for a long moment, his instincts screaming warnings he couldn't quite understand. Something about her was different, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with weapons or corporate power. He closed the file with more force than necessary and pushed it aside. Whatever games Silver Moon wanted to play, Whatever weapons they thought they could use against him, he would be ready. After all, he was Cade Blackthorne, alpha of the most powerful pack on the continent. There was nothing and no one he couldn't handle. The irony of that thought would become apparent soon enough. But for now, he sat in his domain, surrounded by the certainty of his own supremacy, completely unaware that his perfectly ordered world was about to be turned upside down by a 5'6" environmental scientist who had never backed down from a fight in her life. The hunt was about to begin indeed, but the question of who was predator and who was prey remained to be seen. Chapter 2. 3 days later, Cade stood in the marble lobby of Silvermoon Corporation's Seattle headquarters, every inch the predator in enemy territory. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his posture relaxed yet ready, and his amber eyes swept the corporate environment with barely concealed disdain. Humans scurried past him in their pressed uniforms and nervous energy, completely unaware that death incarnate stood among them in Italian leather shoes. Mr. Blackthorne? A young receptionist approached with the careful smile of someone paid to be pleasant to dangerous men. Ms. Chun will see you now. Conference room A, 42nd floor. Cade nodded once, not bothering to thank her. Politeness was a luxury he reserved for those who earned it, and no one in this glass and steel monument to human greed had done anything to warrant his courtesy. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave him time to center himself, to ensure that his human mask was perfectly in place. Today's meeting was reconnaissance, a chance to assess Silvermoon's key players before he destroyed them. He had agreed to hear their proposal for his territory, knowing full well that he would reject whatever pathetic offer they made. But intelligence was power, and power was everything. The elevator dinged softly, and Cade stepped into a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the Seattle skyline. Impressive, he admitted privately. If you were the kind of person who needed to compensate for your inadequacies with expensive real estate and manufactured views. Conference room A was a study in corporate intimidation, a massive table surrounded by leather chairs, walls lined with awards and photographs of Silvermoon's various development successes. 3 people waited inside. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit who had to be Thomas Chun, Silvermoon's CEO, a younger man with nervous energy who was probably some kind of legal counsel, and Cade's breath caught in his throat. The woman from the file sat at the far end of the table, but the photograph had captured none of her presence, none of the way she seemed to command the space around her without effort. Dr. Aria Thorne was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful, sharp edges and hidden depths, auburn hair that caught the light like flame, and those green eyes that met his gaze directly without a hint of the submission he was accustomed to inspiring. She was reviewing a tablet with the kind of focused attention that suggested she had better things to do than attend this meeting. When she finally looked up at him, her expression was politely professional and completely unimpressed. Mr. Blackthorne, Thomas Chun rose from his seat, extending a hand that Cade shook with just enough pressure to make his point. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I know you're a busy man. I am, Cade replied, settling into the chair directly across from Dr. Thorne. He had intended to sit at the head of the table, the power position, but something about her complete indifference to his presence made him want to study her more closely. Let's get to the point. Of course. Chun gestured to his companions. This is David Martinez, our chief legal counsel, and Dr. Aria Thorne, our director of environmental impact assessment. Dr. Thorne will be overseeing the ecological surveys of your territory, should we reach an agreement. Dr. Thorne. Cade let her name roll off his tongue, watching for any reaction. She gave him nothing, no flutter of interest, no recognition of his reputation, no indication that she found him any more compelling than the coffee cup beside her tablet. Mr. Blackthorne. Her voice was crisp, professional, with just a hint of something that might have been amusement. I've read the preliminary reports on your land. Quite impressive biodiversity. It would be a shame to see it damaged by improper development practices. There was the first subtle challenge. She wasn't just discussing his territory as a commodity to be exploited. She was positioning herself as its potential protector. From him, Cade leaned back in his chair, allowing his predator's smile to surface. I'm sure it would be. Fortunately, that's not your concern. My land has been protected by my family for generations. We know how to preserve what matters. Do you? Dr. Thorne tilted her head slightly, and Cade felt his wolf stir with interest at the gesture. Because the satellite imagery suggests several areas of concerning erosion along your eastern borders. And the water table analysis indicates potential contamination from an old mining operation that was supposedly remediated 20 years ago. Silence fell over the conference room like a held breath. Thomas Chin shot Dr. Thorne a warning look, clearly uncomfortable with her direct challenge to a man they were trying to do business with. The legal counsel looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. But Cade found himself fascinated rather than insulted. When was the last time someone had dared to question his stewardship of his own territory? When was the last time anyone had looked him in the eye and suggested he might be failing at something? Your satellite imagery, he said carefully, doesn't account for the seasonal migration patterns of the local wildlife or the natural drainage systems that have existed for centuries before your technology was sophisticated enough to detect them. Seasonal migration patterns. Dr. Thorne made a note on her tablet. Yes, I'd like to discuss those. Particularly the unusual behavioral changes that have been documented in the local wolf population over the past decade. Increased territorial aggression, pack consolidation, hunting patterns that don't match established biological norms. Cade's blood went cold. She was talking about his pack, about the changes that had occurred under his leadership as supernatural wolves had joined with natural ones under his protection. Information that should have been impossible for humans to detect, let alone analyze. I'm not sure what you're implying, Dr. Thorne, he said, his voice dropping to a register that made grown men back down. She didn't back down. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her green eyes boring into his with uncomfortable intensity. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Blackthorne. I'm stating facts. The ecological balance of your territory has been dramatically altered in the past 12 years. Whatever you've been doing differently, it's created ripple effects throughout the entire ecosystem. Maybe we should focus on the business proposal, Chin interjected hastily, clearly sensing the tension crackling between them. Yes, let's. Cade never took his eyes off Dr. Thorne. What exactly does Silvermoon want for my land? For the next hour, they outline their proposal with corporate precision. Selective logging rights, mineral surveys, the construction of an eco-friendly research facility that would minimize environmental impact while providing substantial economic benefits to the local community. It was everything Cade had expected, a politely worded land grab wrapped in environmental rhetoric and financial incentives. He listened with half his attention while the other half remained focused on the woman across from him, cataloging every micro-expression, every gesture, every word. Dr. Thorne said little during the main presentation, but when she did speak, it was to raise concerns about wildlife disruption, water contamination, and long-term ecological damage. She fought for his land more effectively than he would have expected from someone whose company wanted to exploit it. The proposal is interesting, Cade said when Chin finally finished his pitch. But I have some concerns about your environmental impact assessments. Of course, Chin replied smoothly. That's exactly why Dr. Thorne is here. She'll personally oversee every aspect of.
No.
The word cut through the air like a blade. If Dr. Thorne wants to assess my land, she'll do it properly. That means extended field work, comprehensive surveys, direct observation of the wildlife she's so concerned about. Dr. Thorne's eyebrows rose slightly. Are you suggesting I don't know how to do my job, Mr. Blackthorne? I'm suggesting that you can't understand an ecosystem from satellite photos and academic papers. If you want to evaluate my territory, you'll need to spend time there.
Real time.
Weeks, not days. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of the challenge he was issuing. That can be arranged. Though I should warn you, I'm quite thorough in my assessments. Some property owners find my methods intrusive. I'm sure they do. Cade stood, signaling the end of the meeting. But I'm not most property owners, Dr. Thorne. Your thorough methods don't concern me. She stood as well, and he was struck again by her presence, the way she seemed to take up more space than her physical size should have allowed. Good. Because I don't believe in cutting corners or accepting convenient explanations. If there are secrets on your land, Mr. Blackthorne, I will find them. The words hung between them like a gauntlet thrown. Cade extended his hand, and when she took it, he felt a jolt of something. Recognition. Challenge. Electricity that had nothing to do with the corporate fluorescent lighting and everything to do with the woman whose grip was firm and unflinching. I look forward to it, he said, holding her gaze for a moment longer than strictly professional. When can you start? Tomorrow, she replied without hesitation. I'll need accommodations near your territory. Somewhere I can set up a temporary research station. That won't be necessary. You'll stay at my house. The room went dead quiet. Chen looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. Martinez appeared to be having some kind of cardiac event. But Dr. Thorne simply tilted her head again, considering. That's quite an unusual arrangement, Mr. Blackthorne. Are you sure that's appropriate? My property is vast and largely inaccessible by conventional vehicles. My home is the only reasonable base of operations for the kind of comprehensive survey you claim you want to conduct. Cade's smile was all business, but his wolf was practically howling with anticipation. Unless, of course, you're not as thorough as you claim to be. Oh, I'm very thorough. Her smile matched his, sharp, challenging, with an undercurrent of something that made his pulse quicken. I accept your offer, Mr. Blackthorne. I'll see you tomorrow. She gathered her tablet and files with efficient movements, nodded politely to Chen and Martinez, and walked out of the conference room without a backward glance. Cade watched her go, admiring the confident stride, the way she moved through the world as if she owned it. Only when the elevator doors closed behind her did he realize that Thomas Chen was speaking to him. Not entirely sure this is wise, Mr. Blackthorne. Dr. Thorne is brilliant, but she can be difficult. She's been known to shut down projects 3 times her size when she finds environmental violations. Has she? Cade's attention was still focused on the hallway, where she had disappeared. How interesting. If you'd prefer a different environmental consultant.
No.
Cade turned back to the corporate executives, and they both took an involuntary step backward at whatever they saw in his expression. Dr. Thorne will do perfectly. 20 minutes later, Cade stood on the sidewalk outside Silvermoon's headquarters, breathing in the exhaust-tinged air of downtown Seattle. His phone buzzed with messages from Marcus and other pack members, but he ignored them all. Instead, he found himself thinking about green eyes and auburn hair, about a woman who had looked at him without fear or submission, who had challenged his authority and questioned his competence, as if she had every right to do so. Dr. Aria Thorne had no idea what she was walking into. She thought she was coming to assess his land for corporate development, to catalog flora and fauna, and write reports about environmental impact. She had no clue that she was about to enter a world where werewolves ran through moonlit forests, where territorial disputes were settled with fang and claw, where the man she had just challenged was an apex predator who could snap her neck with one hand. Cade should have been planning how to hide his pack's true nature, how to manage the threat that her presence represented. Instead, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the way she had refused to look away when he tried to stare her down. Dr. Aria Thorne was coming to his territory, his domain, where he made the rules and everyone else followed them. This was going to be very, very interesting. Chapter 3. Dr. Aria Thorne had faced down corporate executives, government officials, and environmental disasters that would have sent lesser scientists running for the hills. She had testified before Congress, shut down illegal mining operations, and once spent 3 weeks alone in the Alaskan wilderness documenting the effects of an oil spill on local wildlife. Very little intimidated her anymore. But as her rental car wound up the increasingly narrow mountain road toward Cade Blackthorne's property, she found herself gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. It wasn't the remoteness that unsettled her. She was used to working in isolated locations. It wasn't even the dense forest that pressed in on both sides of the road, though the ancient trees seemed to loom with unusual presence in the late afternoon shadows. No, What had her nerves on edge was the memory of amber eyes that had seemed to see straight through her professional composure, and the way her pulse had quickened when Cade Blackthorne smiled like a predator who had just spotted his next meal. Professional, she muttered to herself, navigating another sharp curve. This is a professional assessment of environmental impact. Nothing more. The GPS on her phone had lost signal 20 minutes ago, but Blackthorne's directions had been precise. Follow the main road for 37 miles past the last gas station. Turn left at the stone marker with the wolf carving. Continue for another 12 miles until you reach the gate. She almost missed the stone marker, a weathered granite pillar that stood about 4 feet tall, carved with the image of a wolf's head that seemed to watch her pass with stone eyes. The left turn took her onto an even narrower road, this one paved but clearly private. No mailboxes, no driveways, no signs of human habitation except for the road itself. The forest here was different from what she had passed through earlier. Older. Wilder. The trees were massive, Douglas firs and western hemlocks that had to be centuries old, their canopies so thick that very little sunlight reached the forest floor. It was beautiful, she admitted, and exactly the kind of pristine wilderness that Silvermoon Corporation had no business touching. Which made Cade Blackthorne's willingness to even hear their proposal all the more puzzling. Aria had spent the previous evening researching everything she could find about him, but the information had been frustratingly sparse. Inherited the property from his father 12 years ago. No public records of employment, though his tax filings suggested significant income from unspecified consulting work. No criminal record, no lawsuits, no social media presence. He was either incredibly private or incredibly good at staying off the grid. What she had found were the environmental surveys that had sparked her interest in the first place. The satellite imagery showed a property that was not just well-maintained, but actually improving over time. Reforestation in areas that had been logged decades ago. Stream restoration. Wildlife populations that were thriving rather than just surviving. And then there were the wolves. Aria pulled her car to a stop and consulted her notes. According to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the wolf population in this region had been stable at around 30 individuals for the past several decades. But recent camera trap studies suggested the numbers had nearly doubled in the past 10 years, with pack structures that defied everything scientists understood about wolf behavior. Multiple packs occupying overlapping territories without conflict. Hunting patterns that seemed almost coordinated between groups, and reports from local ranchers of wolves that were larger, more intelligent, more aware than normal. It was probably nothing more than improved conservation efforts and natural population recovery. But Aria had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that something unusual was happening in these mountains. The gate, when she finally reached it, was more impressive than she had expected. Wrought iron and stone, easily 12 feet high, with the same wolf motif she had seen on the marker. It was also standing wide open, as if someone had been expecting her. Beyond the gate, the road improved dramatically, still gravel, but well-maintained gravel, smooth enough that she could increase her speed slightly. The forest began to thin, giving way to meadows dotted with wildflowers and crossed by streams that sparkled in the fading sunlight. And then she saw the house. Aria had been expecting a cabin, something rustic and masculine that would fit with Blackthorne's outdoorsy image. Instead, she found herself staring at what could only be described as a mountain mansion. 3 stories of stone and timber that managed to look both imposing and organic, as if it had grown from the mountainside itself. Wide porches, massive windows, and architectural lines that spoke of someone with both unlimited resources and impeccable taste. She parked in the circular driveway, next to a black SUV that probably cost more than her annual salary, and took a moment to collect herself. Through her professional career, she had learned that first impressions mattered, that showing confidence and competence from the start could prevent a lot of problems down the road. The front door opened before she could knock. Dr. Thorne. Cade Blackthorne stood in the doorway, and Aria felt her breath catch for the second time in 2 days. Gone was the corporate suit from yesterday's meeting. Instead, he wore jeans that fit him like they had been custom-made, and a dark green Henley that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he had been running his hands through it, and those amber eyes seemed to glow in the porch lighting. "Mr. Blackthorne." She managed to keep her voice steady as she grabbed her overnight bag and equipment cases from the back seat. "Thank you for accommodating my research needs." "My pleasure." He moved down the steps with fluid grace, reaching for her heaviest equipment case before she could protest. "Let me help you with those." "That's not necessary." But he had already lifted the case, 60 pounds of sensitive monitoring equipment, as if it weighed nothing at all. "This way." Aria followed him up the steps and through the front door, trying not to stare at the way his jeans fit or the way his muscles moved under the thin fabric of his shirt. "Professional," she reminded herself. "You are here in a professional capacity." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings with exposed beams, stone fireplaces large enough to roast a deer, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding wilderness. But what struck her most was how lived in it felt, how comfortable. This wasn't a showplace designed to impress visitors. It was a home. "Your guest room is upstairs," Cade said, setting down her equipment with careful precision. "I thought you might want to get settled before we discuss your research plans." "That would be perfect." Aria glanced around the main living area, taking note of details she might need later. "This is a beautiful home. Have you lived here long?" "All my life." Something flickered across his expression, too quick for her to interpret. "My family has owned this land for generations. We don't give it up easily." There was something in his tone, a warning perhaps, that made her look at him more closely. But his expression had returned to polite neutrality, offering no clues to whatever thoughts lay behind those unsettling eyes. "I can understand why," she said carefully. "The environmental diversity here is remarkable. I saw at least 6 different ecosystem types just on the drive from the gate." "Did you?" His smile was sharp-edged. "And what conclusions are you drawing from that observation, Dr. Thorne?" The question felt like a test, though she couldn't imagine what answer he was looking for. That this property represents exactly the kind of pristine habitat that should be protected from industrial development, which makes Silvermoon's interest and your willingness to entertain their proposal somewhat puzzling. Cade studied her for a long moment, and Aria found herself holding her breath under the intensity of his gaze. Finally, he nodded toward the stairs. "Your room is the second door on the right. Dinner will be ready in an hour if you'd like to join me. We can discuss the details of your survey over wine." "That sounds—" Aria began, then caught herself. Wine with dinner sounded dangerously close to a date, and she was here for business. Nothing more. "That sounds professional." "Thank you." His laugh was low and rich, with an undertone that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "Professional. Of course." The guest room was as beautifully appointed as the rest of the house, a king-sized bed with a view of the valley below, an ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and a desk where she could set up her laptop and review her research notes. Aria unpacked quickly and efficiently, hanging her clothes in the walk-in closet and setting up her laptop on the desk. Then she moved to the window and stood looking out over Cade Blackthorne's domain. The sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reflected off the stream running through the meadow below. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear what sounded like a wolf howl. Not the lonely call she would have expected, but something that seemed almost like a greeting. Another howl answered from a different direction, then another. Within moments, the entire valley seemed to echo with the sound of wolves calling to one another in some complex harmony that raised the hair on the back of her neck. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Aria spun around to find Cade standing in her doorway, holding 2 glasses of wine. She hadn't heard him approach. The man moved like a cat, silent and predatory. "I didn't hear you knock," she said, accepting the wine glass he offered. "I did knock. You must have been distracted by the evening song." He moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine with an undertone of cedar and wild places. "Evening song. That's what my father used to call it. The wolves singing the day to sleep." Cade sipped his wine, his attention seemingly focused on the view outside. "They've been doing it for as long as anyone can remember. Longer, probably." Aria listened to the continuing chorus of howls, her scientist's mind cataloging the different voices, the way they seemed to answer and respond to one another. It's unusual behavior for wolves. Typically, they howl to locate pack members or establish territory. This sounds almost what? Coordinated. Like they're communicating specific information rather than just making noise. Cade was quiet for so long that she began to wonder if she had said something wrong. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. You have an interesting perspective on wolf behavior, Dr. Thorne. Most people just hear noise. Most people don't spend their careers studying animal behavior and ecosystem dynamics. Aria turned to face him, surprised to find him watching her with that same unsettling intensity she remembered from their first meeting. What do you hear when they howl?
Home, he said simply.
I hear home. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, the polite mask slipped, and she saw something raw and genuine in his expression. Then it was gone, replaced by that predatory smile that made her pulse quicken. Shall we have dinner? I'm curious to hear more about your theories on unusual wolf behavior. Dinner was served on the main floor, in a dining room that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. Cade had prepared the meal himself, perfectly grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a salad that featured greens she suspected came from his own garden. You cook, Aria observed, impressed despite herself. Among other things. He poured more wine, his fingers brushing hers as he handed her the glass. Living this far from civilization requires a certain degree of self-sufficiency. Is that why you're considering Silvermoon's proposal? The isolation can't be easy. The isolation is exactly what I value most about this place. Cade's tone sharpened slightly, which is why I find Silvermoon's interests so curious. Aria set down her fork, recognizing the shift in his demeanor. You think there's more to their proposal than timber rights and mineral surveys, don't you? He leaned back in his chair, studying her over the rim of his wine glass. You're their environmental specialist. What does your assessment tell you about their true intentions? It was another test, she realized. He was probing to see how much she knew, how much she suspected. The smart thing would be to give him the corporate line, to stick to the official reasons for Silvermoon's interest in his property. But something about the way he was looking at her, as if her answer actually mattered, made her decide on honesty instead. I think Silvermoon has been systematically targeting properties with specific characteristics, she said carefully. Remote locations, limited access, owners with no interest in selling. They're not just looking for timber or minerals, Mr. Blackthorne. They're looking for something else. And what do you think that something else might be? Aria met his gaze directly. I think they're looking for places where they can conduct activities without oversight. Research projects, testing programs, operations that they don't want subjected to normal regulatory scrutiny. Cade was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been approval. That's a very astute observation, Dr. Thorne. And what do you intend to do with that theory? My job, she said simply. I'm going to conduct the most thorough environmental assessment this property has ever seen. And if I find any reason to believe that Silvermoon's proposed activities would damage this ecosystem, I'm going to recommend against the project. Even if that recommendation costs you your job? Aria smiled, feeling more confident than she had since arriving. Mr. Blackthorne, I've been fired from better positions for less noble reasons. My integrity is not for sale. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He raised his wine glass in a mock toast. To integrity, then, and to thorough environmental assessments. They clinked glasses, and Aria felt a thrill of anticipation that had nothing to do with her research and everything to do with the way Cade Blackthorne was looking at her, as if she were a puzzle he was finally beginning to understand. Outside, the wolves had gone quiet, but the silence felt expectant rather than peaceful, as if the entire forest were waiting for something to happen. Aria had no idea how right that feeling was. Chapter 4. Aria woke to the sound of something moving outside her window. She lay still in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the soft scrape of what might have been claws against stone, followed by a low rumble that was too deep to be coming from any domestic animal. The luminous numbers on her phone told her it was 3:17 a.m., deep night in the wilderness, when predators did their hunting. Moving carefully, she slipped from beneath the covers and padded barefoot to the window. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver and shadow, and at first she saw nothing unusual. Just the peaceful meadow, the stream catching moonlight like scattered diamonds, and the dark wall of forest beyond. Then she saw the eyes. Dozens of them, reflecting the moonlight from the tree line. Too large to be coyotes, too numerous to be a normal wolf pack. They watched the house with an intelligence that made her skin prickle, and she had the unsettling feeling that they were watching her specifically. As she stood at the window, one of the shapes detached itself from the shadows and moved into the moonlight. It was enormous, easily the size of a small horse, with silver-gray fur and yellow eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. It looked directly up at her window, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, woman and wolf stared at each other across the space between civilization and wildness. Then it turned and melted back into the forest, taking the watching eyes with it. Aria remained at the window for another 20 minutes, but the meadow stayed empty. Whatever she had seen, whatever had been watching her, was gone. She returned to bed, but didn't sleep. Instead, she lay in the darkness thinking about coordinated wolf behavior, about ecosystem changes, and about the man sleeping somewhere in this house who seemed to command respect from both corporate executives and wild animals with equal ease. By the time dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Aria had made a decision. If she was going to understand what was really happening on this property, she needed to get out into the field and see it for herself. She dressed in her standard field gear, hiking boots, cargo pants with more pockets than any reasonable person needed, and a long-sleeved shirt that would protect her from both sun and brush. Her equipment was already packed and ready: water samples, soil analysis kits, camera traps, GPS units, and enough recording devices to document every sound the forest made. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her downstairs, where she found Cade in the kitchen, standing at the stove with the easy competence of someone accustomed to taking care of himself. He had dressed for the outdoors too, she noted: jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "Good morning, Dr. Thorne. Sleep well?" "Well enough." She accepted the cup of coffee he offered, inhaling the rich aroma gratefully. "Though I did have some unusual visitors around 3 a.m. Cade's hand stilled for just a fraction of a second before resuming its motion with his spatula. Visitors? Wolves. A lot of them. They were watching the house. Aria studied his profile, looking for any reaction. Is that normal behavior for this area? Wolves are curious creatures. And you're new to their territory. Cade plated bacon and eggs with practiced efficiency, setting a full breakfast in front of her. They were probably just investigating the unfamiliar scent. Possibly. Aria took a bite of perfectly cooked eggs, considering her words carefully. Though their behavior seemed unusually organized, almost like they were reporting back to someone. This time, Cade's reaction was unmistakable. His entire body went rigid for a moment, and when he turned to face her, those amber eyes burned with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "That's an interesting theory," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "What makes you think wolves would report to anyone?" "Pack hierarchy. Alpha dynamics. The way they seem to be waiting for something." Aria met his gaze directly. "I've studied wolf behavior extensively, Mr. Blackthorne. What I saw last night doesn't match any documented patterns." Cade was quiet for a long moment, and she could almost see him weighing his options, deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he sat down across from her with his own plate. "This land has been in my family for 5 generations, he said carefully. "We've always had a special relationship with the local wildlife. They trust us. Protect us even. In return, we protect them." Protect them from what? Hunters. Developers. People who would destroy their habitat for profit. His smile was sharp-edged. People like your employers at Silvermoon Corporation. Aria set down her fork, recognizing the challenge in his tone. "Is that what this is about? You brought me here to convert me to your cause. I brought you here because you claim to be thorough, because you say you won't cut corners or accept convenient explanations. Cade leaned forward, his intensity palpable. So don't. Be thorough, Dr. Thorne. Ask the hard questions. Look for the real answers. I intend to. She pushed back from the table, her professional instincts overriding her personal reaction to his proximity. Which is why I need to start my field work immediately. I'll need access to the entire property. Of course. Including areas that might normally be off-limits. Naturally. And I'll need someone familiar with the terrain to guide me through the most remote sections. Cade's smile was all predator now. I volunteer for that duty. Aria blinked, caught off guard. She had expected him to assign her a subordinate, some local guide who could show her around while he attended to more important business. The idea of spending days alone in the wilderness with Cade Blackthorne was both thrilling and terrifying. That's very generous, but I'm sure you have other responsibilities. Nothing more important than ensuring you get the complete picture of what you're evaluating. He stood, moving with that fluid grace she was beginning to recognize as characteristic. Unless, of course, you're concerned about spending time alone with me? The challenge was unmistakable, and Aria felt her chin lift in automatic response. Of course not. This is a professional assessment, Mr. Blackthorne. Your presence or absence won't affect my objectivity. Good. His laugh was low and dangerous. Because objectivity is exactly what we're going to need. An hour later, they set off into the forest, following a trail that was barely visible to Aria's untrained eye, but which Cade navigated with the confidence of someone who had walked it 1,000 times. She had loaded herself down with equipment, sample collection kits, measurement devices, cameras, while Cade carried only a small backpack and moved through the wilderness as if he belonged there, which she was beginning to suspect he did in ways that went beyond simple property ownership. Tell me about the reforestation efforts, she said as they climbed a ridge that offered spectacular views of the valley below. The satellite imagery shows significant new growth in areas that were clear-cut 20 years ago. My father started the replanting program when I was a teenager. We've continued it ever since. Cade paused to let her catch her breath, though he showed no signs of exertion despite the steep terrain. This land has been exploited by humans for over a century. Mining, logging, hunting. It needed time to heal. And you gave it that time. We gave it protection. The healing was its own choice. Aria studied the forest around them, noting the diversity of species, the healthy understory, the clear streams that ran between moss-covered stones. It was more than conservation. It was restoration on a scale that should have taken decades to achieve. How long did it take, she asked, for the ecosystem to recover to this extent? Longer than you might think. Shorter than it should have taken. Cade's expression was unreadable. Nature has its own timetable, Dr. Thorne. Sometimes it surprises us. They continued climbing, and Aria found herself grateful for her regular gym routine as the trail became increasingly steep. Cade moved ahead of her with tireless energy, occasionally pausing to point out particular species of plants or to identify bird calls that echoed through the canopy. You know this forest very well, she observed during one of their rest stops. I should. I've been exploring it since I was old enough to walk. He handed her a water bottle from his pack, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent electricity up her arm. My father believed that understanding the land was essential to protecting it. Wise man. Is he still involved in the property management? Something flickered across Cade's expression. Pain, perhaps, or loss. He died 12 years ago. I've been responsible for the land ever since. I'm sorry. The words came automatically, but she meant them. It must have been difficult, taking on that kind of responsibility so young. I was ready. His tone brooked no argument, but Aria caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. My father made sure of that. They resumed hiking, and Aria found herself studying Cade as much as the surrounding ecosystem. There was something almost supernatural about the way he moved through the forest, silent, sure-footed, completely at home in the wild places. Birds didn't startle when he passed. Small animals watched him with curiosity rather than fear. Even the trees seemed to part for him, creating natural pathways that she couldn't see until he led her through them. "There," he said, pointing to a clearing ahead. "This is what I wanted to show you." The meadow was breathtaking, perhaps 2 acres of wildflowers and native grasses surrounded by towering evergreens. A stream meandered through the center, creating natural pools that reflected the sky like mirrors. But what caught Aria's attention was the wildlife. Deer grazed peacefully in the afternoon sunlight, their ears swiveling to track the newcomers, but showing no inclination to flee. A family of raccoons played near the stream, chittering to each other in apparent conversation. High overhead, eagles circled in lazy spirals, and from somewhere in the forest came the haunting call of a wolf. "This is incredible," Aria breathed, pulling out her camera to document the scene. "The biodiversity, the lack of human impact, it's like stepping back in time." "Time," Cade said quietly, "or forward into what the world could be again, given the chance." She spent the next hour taking samples and measurements, recording everything from soil composition to water quality to the specific species of plants and animals they observed. Cade watched her work with patient attention, occasionally offering insights about seasonal variations or behavioral patterns he had observed over the years. It was professional, scientific, exactly what she had come here to do. So why did she keep finding herself distracted by the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, or the way his voice seemed to resonate through her bones when he spoke quietly about the land he loved? "Dr. Thorne." His voice was closer than she had expected, and she looked up from her soil sample kit to find him standing directly beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the clean scent of pine and mountain air. "Yes." Her voice came out slightly breathless, and she cleared her throat in annoyance at her own reaction. "We should head back soon. The forest changes after dark, and some of its inhabitants are less welcoming to strangers." There was something in his tone that made her look at him more closely. "What kind of inhabitants?" Cade's smile was sharp and dangerous. "The kind that don't appreciate humans wandering through their territory without proper protection." "You mean the wolves?" Among other things. Aria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What other things?" But Cade was already moving toward the trail, leaving her to pack up her equipment and follow. As they descended the ridge, the shadows grew longer, and the forest sounds changed. The cheerful bird songs of afternoon gave way to deeper calls, more primal sounds that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. By the time they reached the house, full darkness had fallen, and the evening wolf chorus had begun again. But tonight it sounded different to Aria's ears. Not just communication, but coordination, organization, purpose. "Thank you for today," she said as they stood on the front porch, the house lights casting a warm glow around them. "I've learned a great deal about your property." "Have you?" Cade moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "And what conclusions are you drawing, Dr. Thorne?" The question seemed loaded with meaning beyond the obvious. Aria found herself studying his face in the porch light, noting the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the way his amber eyes seemed to glow with their own inner fire. "I'm beginning to think," she said carefully, "that there's much more to this land, and to you, than appears on the surface." "Is that your scientific opinion?" "It's my professional observation." She stepped back, needing distance from his overwhelming presence. "Good night, Mr. Blackthorne. I'll see you in the morning." But as she climbed the stairs to her room, Aria could feel his eyes following her, and she had the distinct impression that she was the one being studied now. That she had become the subject of his investigation as much as he was the subject of hers. From her window, she could see him standing in the meadow behind the house, his face turned toward the forest. As she watched, shapes began to emerge from the tree line, the same wolves she had seen the night before, but this time they didn't stay in the shadows. They approached Cade directly, surrounding him in a loose circle that spoke of familiarity rather than threat. The largest of them, the silver-gray wolf from the previous night, came close enough to touch, and Aria would have sworn she saw Cade reach out to run his fingers through its fur. Then the wolf looked directly up at her window, its yellow eyes meeting hers across the darkness with an intelligence that made her blood run cold. Because for just a moment, just one impossible, heart-stopping moment, those eyes looked exactly like Cade Blackthorne's. Chapter 5. Aria didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through everything she had observed over the past 2 days. The coordinated wolf behavior, the impossible ecosystem recovery, the way Cade moved through the forest like he owned it, not just legally, but fundamentally, the way a predator owned its hunting grounds. And those eyes. God, those impossible golden eyes that had looked at her from a wolf's face with unmistakably human intelligence. At 4 a.m., she gave up on sleep entirely and moved to her laptop, pulling up every research paper she had ever read on wolf behavior, pack dynamics, and human-wildlife interaction. There had to be a rational explanation. There was always a rational explanation, wasn't there? By dawn, she had filled 17 pages with notes and observations, each one leading her to conclusions that her scientific training insisted were impossible. The evidence pointed to a level of coordination and intelligence in the local wolf population that simply didn't exist in nature. Unless it wasn't entirely natural. A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Dr. Thorne? Breakfast is ready." Cade's voice through the door sounded perfectly normal, polite, professional, human. Not like someone who spent his evenings communing with apex predators in ways that defied biological reality. "I'll be right down," she called back, quickly saving her notes and closing the laptop. She found him in the kitchen again, moving with that same fluid grace as he prepared what looked like enough food for 3 people. Coffee, eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, and toast that smelled like it had been made from bread baked that morning. "You cook a lot for someone who lives alone," she observed, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "I don't always live alone." The words were casual, but something in his tone made her look at him more sharply. "I often have houseguests. People who share my commitment to protecting this land." "What kind of people?" Cade's smile was enigmatic. The kind who understand that some things are worth fighting for. Before she could ask for clarification, he changed the subject. "I thought we might explore the northern section today. There's something there I think you'll find particularly interesting from a scientific perspective." "What kind of something?" "The kind that might help explain some of the unusual wildlife behavior you've been documenting." Aria's pulse quickened. Was he finally going to give her real answers? I'd like that very much. An hour later, they were hiking through terrain that was even more remote than yesterday's route. The trail, if it could be called a trail, wound through dense forest and over rocky outcroppings that required actual climbing skills to navigate. Aria was grateful for her years of rock climbing experience, but even so, she found herself struggling to keep up with Cade's tireless pace. "How much farther?" she asked during a brief rest stop, trying not to sound as winded as she felt. "Not much." He consulted what looked like an expensive GPS device. "Another mile, maybe less." "And what exactly are we going to find when we get there?" Cade turned to look at her, and for a moment she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Answers," he said simply. "Though I'm not sure you're going to like them." The warning sent a chill down her spine, but she nodded for him to continue. She had come here for the truth, whatever it might be. The northern section of his property was unlike anything she had seen so far. The forest here was older, wilder, with trees that had to be centuries old, and an understory that seemed almost primeval. There were no signs of human habitation, no old logging roads, no abandoned structures, nothing to suggest that people had ever set foot in this place. "This area has been undisturbed for over 200 years, Cade explained as they walked through the ancient grove. "My family has made sure of that." "Why this section in particular? What makes it so special?" "You'll see." They climbed higher, following what might have been a game trail through increasingly dense vegetation. Aria was so focused on watching her footing that she almost missed it when they finally arrived at their destination. The clearing was perhaps 50 feet in diameter, surrounded by the massive ancient trees, but open to the sky above. What made it remarkable wasn't its size, but what occupied the center, a circle of standing stones. each one roughly 6 feet tall and covered with carved symbols that looked far older than anything she had ever seen in North America. "My God," she breathed, pulling out her camera. "What is this place?" "The Wolf's Call at the Heartstone." Cade's voice was quiet, respectful. "It's been here longer than recorded history. Longer than white settlement. Longer than the indigenous peoples who came before them." Aria approached the stones cautiously, her scientific mind cataloging details even as her instincts screamed that this place was significant in ways she couldn't understand. The symbols carved into the rock were unlike any Native American petroglyphs she had studied. They seemed to shift and flow in her peripheral vision, as if they were somehow alive. "These carvings," she said, running her fingers over the weathered stone. "They're not from any known culture. The style, the technique, it's completely unique." "Yes," Cade said simply. "But that's impossible. Every indigenous culture in North America has been documented, studied. There are no unknown civilizations." "Aren't there?" Something in his tone made her turn to face him. He was standing at the edge of the circle, his amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What are you saying?" she asked carefully. "I'm saying that human history isn't the only history, Dr. Thorne. That there are things walking this earth that were old when the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia. Things that have their own cultures, their own sacred places, their own ways of understanding the world." Aria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, not literally, but conceptually. Everything she thought she knew about this place, about the wildlife behavior she had observed, about Cade himself, was being redefined in ways that challenged her fundamental understanding of reality. "You're talking about the wolves," she said slowly. "You're saying they're more than just animals. I'm saying that intelligence takes many forms. That consciousness isn't limited to humans." Cade stepped into the circle, moving toward the central stone with reverence. "That some secrets are kept not because they're dangerous, but because the world isn't ready to understand them." "Cade." She used his first name without thinking, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you telling me?" He stopped in front of the central stone, his back to her, his shoulders tense with some internal struggle. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "I'm telling you that you were right about the coordinated behavior, about the intelligence behind their actions, about the fact that they seem to be reporting to someone." He turned to face her, and his eyes were no longer entirely human. "I'm telling you that they were reporting to me." The world tilted. Aria stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was saying, what she was seeing. His features were the same, the sharp cheekbones, the strong jaw, the dark hair, but his eyes now burned with golden fire, and when he smiled, she could see teeth that were just slightly too sharp to be entirely human. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" He took a step toward her, and she noticed that his movements had become even more fluid, more predatory. "You've been documenting impossible things for 3 days now, Dr. Thorne. Ecosystem recovery that defies natural timelines. Wildlife behavior that suggests communication and coordination beyond anything science recognizes. Wolf populations that seem to be thriving under conditions that should limit their numbers." Another step, another degree of impossible truth. "You wanted thorough answers. You wanted to understand what makes this land so special, why I'm so determined to protect it from corporate development." His smile was all predator now, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "The answer is standing right in front of you. She couldn't say it, couldn't speak the word that would make this real. "I'm the alpha of the largest werewolf pack in North America," Cade said simply. "I have been for 12 years, ever since I challenged my father for the right to lead. The wolves you've been studying aren't just wolves, Aria. They're my people, my family, my responsibility to protect." Werewolf. The word hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Aria felt her knees go weak, and she sat down hard on the ground, her scientific worldview crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. That can't be. She struggled for words, for any rational response to information that redefined everything she thought she knew about the natural world. Cade knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, she could see the truth in his features, the almost supernatural beauty, the predatory grace, the eyes that held far more knowledge and pain than any 32-year-old human should possess. "I know it's a lot to process," he said gently. "I know it challenges everything you've been taught about what's possible in the world." "Why?" The word came out as a broken whisper. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve the truth. Because you've spent 3 days asking the right questions and refusing to accept easy answers." His hand reached out as if to touch her face, then stopped just short of contact. "And because I need you to understand what you're really evaluating when you make your recommendation about Silvermoon's proposal." The proposal. Aria's scientific mind latched onto something concrete, something she could focus on besides the impossible man kneeling in front of her. "You're not worried about environmental damage. You're worried about exposure." "I'm worried about extinction." Cade's voice carried the weight of absolute truth. "Silvermoon isn't just a corporation, Aria. They're part of a network of organizations that hunt supernatural beings for research, for experimentation, for profit. They've been systematically targeting our communities for decades, using environmental assessments and development projects as cover for their real activities." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. The properties Silvermoon had targeted. The remote locations, the owners who didn't want to sell. They weren't looking for timber or minerals. They were hunting werewolves. "That's why you agreed to the assessment," she said slowly. "You knew what they really wanted, and you wanted to find out how much they suspected. And I wanted to know whose side you were on." Cade's golden eyes searched her face. "Whether you were part of their operation or an unwitting tool they were using. And now you know?" "Now I know that Dr. Aria Thorne is exactly who she appears to be, a brilliant scientist with more integrity than sense and a stubborn commitment to protecting the natural world." His smile was soft now, almost tender. "Even if that world turns out to be more natural than she ever imagined." Aria struggled to her feet, needing distance, needing space to think. But even as she backed away from Cade, her eyes were drawn to the ancient stones surrounding them, to the symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "This place," she said. "It's where your people change, yes. Gather for ceremonies. Honor our ancestors." Cade rose as well, but didn't follow her retreat. "It's sacred to us in ways that go back to the beginning of our kind." "How long?" she asked. "How long have werewolves existed?" "Longer than human civilization. We were here when the first humans crossed into this continent. We'll be here long after the last city falls to dust." His expression grew distant. "If we're allowed to survive." The weight of what he was telling her settled on Aria's shoulders like a physical burden. An entire species, hidden from human knowledge, living parallel lives in the shadows of civilization. Protecting territory that wasn't just land but sanctuary, preservation not just of wilderness, but of their very existence. And Silvermoon Corporation wanted to destroy it all for profit. "What do you need from me?" she asked quietly. Cade's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected the question. "What?" "You've trusted me with the truth. You've shown me something that could get your entire pack killed if the wrong people found out." Aria moved back toward the center of the circle, toward him. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to file a report that will make Silvermoon go away. Find environmental violations, endangered species protections, anything that will make this property too legally complicated for them to pursue." "I can do that." She could easily. The ecosystem here was so pristine, so perfectly balanced, that any industrial development would constitute an environmental disaster. But that's just a temporary solution. They'll find other ways, other approaches. "I know." Cade's expression was grim. "But it will buy us time to prepare more permanent defenses." Aria nodded, her mind already working through the scientific justifications she would need for her report. Then another thought occurred to her, one that made her stomach clench with sudden fear. "Cade," she said carefully, "what happens to me now that I know?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Aria had seen movies, read books. She knew how these stories usually ended. The human who learned too much, who became a liability to the supernatural community. But Cade's expression was horrified rather than threatening. "Nothing happens to you," he said firmly. "You go back to your life, file your report, and forget you ever came here." "Forget?" Aria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How exactly am I supposed to forget that werewolves exist? That everything I thought I knew about the natural world was incomplete?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to pain him. "But you can't tell anyone, Aria. Not your colleagues, not your friends, not anyone. The safety of my pack, of packs across the country, depends on humans continuing to believe we're nothing more than legend." She nodded, understanding the weight of the secret she now carried. But another part of her mind was working through different implications, different possibilities. "There's another option," she said slowly. Cade's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I mean I don't have to go back to my old life. I don't have to pretend this never happened." She took a step toward him, then another. "I could stay. Help you protect this place, your people. Use my knowledge of environmental law, corporate tactics."
"No."
The word came out as a growl, and for a moment she saw the predator beneath his human mask. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because this isn't your world, Aria. Because you don't understand what you'd be giving up, what you'd be risking." Cade's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Because I won't be responsible for destroying your life." "What if it's my choice to make?" "It's not that simple." "Why not?" She was close enough to touch him now, close enough to see the conflict warring in his golden eyes. "Because I'm human? Because I don't belong in your world? Because you matter." The words seemed torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "Because in 3 days you've become important to me in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. And because I won't watch you get hurt trying to be part of something that could destroy everything you are." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross. Aria felt her heart racing, not with fear this time, but with something far more dangerous. "Cade," she whispered. But before she could say anything else, the sound of howling echoed through the forest. Not the evening song she had grown accustomed to, but something urgent, alarmed. A warning. Cade's head snapped up, his entire body going rigid with attention. "We need to go.
Now."
"What's wrong?" "Someone's on my property, who shouldn't be." His eyes were already shifting, becoming more wolf than human. "And they're heading straight for the house." Chapter 6. The journey back to the house took half the time it had taken to reach the Heartstone, but it felt like an eternity to Aria. Cade moved through the forest with inhuman speed and grace, no longer bothering to hide his supernatural nature now that the truth was between them. She struggled to keep up, her human limitations feeling more pronounced than ever as branches whipped past her face and rocks threatened to turn her ankles with every step. "Stay close," Cade commanded without looking back, his voice carrying an authority that made her wolf studies suddenly make terrifying sense. This was what alpha dominance actually looked like, not the corporate posturing she had witnessed in Silvamoon's conference room, but primal leadership that demanded absolute obedience from every instinct she possessed. The wolf calls continued to echo through the forest, closer now, more urgent. To Aria's untrained ear, they sounded like chaos, but she could see from Cade's reactions that he was receiving detailed intelligence. His expression grew grimmer with each howled message. "How many?" she gasped during a brief pause to navigate a particularly treacherous slope. 6 humans.
Armed.
Military-grade equipment. His golden eyes swept the forest around them, cataloging threats she couldn't even perceive. They breached the perimeter 20 minutes ago, and they're moving toward the house in formation. Silvermoon. Has to be. Cade's smile was all teeth and no warmth. They must have suspected I was getting too close to the truth about their operations. Or they decided Dr. Aria Thorne was taking too long to file her report. The implication hit her like a physical blow. They're here because of me. Because I didn't immediately recommend approval of their project. They're here because they're hunters, Aria. And we're their prey. Cade's hand closed around her wrist, not hard enough to hurt but firmly enough to ensure her attention. This isn't your fault. This is what they do, what they've been doing to supernatural communities for decades. But Aria could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was already strategizing responses to a threat that wouldn't exist if she hadn't come here. If he hadn't trusted her with the truth. If she hadn't complicated his perfectly ordered world with her stubborn questions and scientific integrity. They reached the edge of the cleared area around the house just as the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. In the gathering dusk, Aria could see lights moving through the forest on the far side of the meadow, flashlights or tactical illumination, systematic and professional. There, Cade pointed to shadows moving between the trees. They're trying to surround the house. What do we do?
We.
Cade's laugh was harsh. You do nothing. You stay here, stay hidden, and let me handle this. Absolutely not. The words came out with more force than Aria had intended, but she didn't back down when Cade turned his predator's stare on her. I'm not hiding while you face armed mercenaries alone. You're human, Aria. Fragile. Breakable. You'll only be a liability in a fight. The dismissal stung, but she pushed past the hurt to focus on logic. I'm also the only one here who understands their corporate structure, their likely tactics, their legal vulnerabilities. You need me. I need you alive. Then keep me alive while we figure out how to stop them. For a moment, they stared at each other in a battle of wills that had nothing to do with werewolf dominance and everything to do with two stubborn people who had found something worth protecting in each other. Finally, Cade nodded curtly. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. And if I say run, you run. No arguments, no hesitation. Agreed. They moved toward the house in a crouch, using the landscape and outbuildings for cover. As they got closer, Aria could make out more details about their uninvited guests. 6 figures in tactical gear, moving with military precision around the perimeter of the property. They carried weapons that looked far more sophisticated than anything civilian contractors should have had access to. Definitely not standard corporate security, she whispered.
No.
These are professionals. The kind Silvermoon keeps on retainer for their more delicate operations. Cade's voice was barely audible even at close range. The kind who specialize in making problems disappear. A chill ran down Aria's spine as she realized what he meant. They weren't here to intimidate or investigate. They were here to eliminate threats to Silvermoon's interests, which apparently now included both her and Cade. Can you contact your pack? She asked. I already have. Cade's smile was predatory. They're on their way. But it'll take time for them to get here, and these hunters know what they're doing. They'll try to finish this quickly. As if summoned by his words, a voice called out from the forest, amplified by some kind of electronic device. Cade Blackthorne, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands visible, and we can discuss this situation like civilized people. Cade snorted with derision. Civilized people don't breach private property with military weapons. Mr. Blackthorne, the voice continued, we represent certain interests that have concerns about your recent activities. We'd like to offer you an opportunity to address those concerns before they become problematic. Corporate euphemisms, Aria muttered. They're offering him a chance to surrender before they kill him. That's what I thought too. Cade's eyes had gone fully golden now, and in the dim light, Aria could see that his features were shifting subtly, sharper, more angular, more dangerous. Time for a different approach. Before she could ask what he meant, Cade tilted his head back and let out a howl that raised every hair on her body. It wasn't entirely human, wasn't entirely wolf, but something in between that spoke to genetic memories buried deep in human DNA. The sound of an apex predator announcing its presence to the world. The forest went silent. Then, from every direction at once, came answering calls. Dozens of them, growing closer by the second. Jesus, one of the tactical team members said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. How many of them are there? More than we planned for, came the reply from what was obviously the team leader. Switch to plan B. Take the targets down fast and extract. The forest exploded into motion. Figures in tactical gear burst from cover, moving toward the house with military precision. But before they could close the distance, shadows began flowing out of the tree line wolves, but wolves unlike anything Aria had ever seen. larger than their natural cousins, with eyes that glowed in the darkness and coordination that spoke of human intelligence. The first mercenary went down without even seeing what hit him. One moment he was advancing on the house, the next he was on the ground with a massive gray wolf standing over him, teeth bared in obvious warning. "Trank guns," the team leader shouted. "Non-lethal takedown. We need specimens, not corpses. Tranquilizer guns." Of course. They weren't here to kill the werewolves, they were here to capture them for research. "Stay here," Cade commanded, his voice already rougher, less human than it had been moments before. "Cade, wait." But he was already moving, and as he ran toward the nearest mercenary, his form began to shift. Bones lengthened, muscles expanded, and by the time he reached his target, he was no longer entirely human. The transformation was fluid, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. Aria pressed herself against the side of the toolshed where Cade had left her, trying to process what she was witnessing. The clearing had become a battlefield, but one unlike anything in human military history. Werewolves flowed through the darkness like living shadows, using their supernatural speed and strength to neutralize threats with surgical precision. But the mercenaries weren't helpless. Their equipment was clearly designed for hunting supernatural beings. Weapons that fired nets instead of bullets, devices that emitted high-frequency sounds that seemed to disorient the wolves, and some kind of chemical spray that made the werewolves recoil in apparent pain. Contact Point 7. The team leader's voice crackled through radio communications. "We have multiple hostile contacts. Repeat, multiple contacts. Requesting immediate extraction." Extraction. They were planning to leave. But not empty-handed. Aria watched in horror as one of the mercenaries managed to hit a smaller wolf with a tranquilizer dart. The animal, she had to remind herself it was a person, someone's family member, stumbled and went down, its legs no longer able to support its weight. "No!" The word tore from her throat before she could stop it. The nearest mercenary spun toward the sound, raising his weapon in her direction. Time slowed as Aria realized her mistake, realized she had revealed her position, realized she was about to become another casualty in a war she had never known existed. Then Cade was there. He hit the mercenary with the force of a freight train, his partially transformed body moving faster than human eyes could follow. The man's weapon flew from his hands as he crashed into a tree with a sound that suggested several broken ribs. But the distraction cost them. While Cade was protecting Aria, another mercenary got a clear shot at him with a tranquilizer gun. The dart hit him in the shoulder, and she could see the drugs taking effect immediately. "Cade." Aria ran toward him as he staggered, fighting the chemical assault on his system. Get away from here," he managed, his words slurred by whatever they had shot him with. "Pack will protect you. I'm not leaving you." But even as she reached him, Aria could see that the battle was turning. The mercenaries' equipment was too sophisticated, their tactics too well-planned. One by one, the wolves were being taken down by tranquilizer darts or incapacitated by the strange chemical spray. "Subject secured," the team leader reported into his radio. "Requesting immediate pickup." In the distance, Aria could hear the sound of approaching helicopters. "No," she whispered, understanding with horrible clarity what was about to happen. "No, you can't take them." But Cade was unconscious now, his body having shifted back to fully human form as the drugs overwhelmed his system. Around the clearing, other wolves lay motionless, their pack bonds severed by chemicals designed to neutralize supernatural beings. The helicopters were getting closer. And Aria was the only one left conscious who knew the truth about what Silvermoon Corporation really was, what they were really doing, and what would happen to these people if they were taken. She pulled out her phone, praying she still had signal this far from civilization. 1 bar. It would have to be enough. She dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? This is Dr. Aria Thorne. I'm calling to report an armed assault on private property. Multiple casualties, suspects in military-style gear, possible kidnapping in progress. She gave the dispatcher Cade's address, speaking as quickly and clearly as she could while remaining hidden behind the toolshed. "Ma'am, we're dispatching units to your location.
Can you stay on the line?"
I have to go." but please hurry. They have helicopters. They're going to take people. She ended the call and immediately dialed another number, one she had memorized but never expected to use. Thomas Chen's office. I need to speak to Chen immediately. This is Dr. Aria Thorne. Dr. Thorne? It's quite late. I'm not sure. Tell him it's about the Blackthorne assessment. Tell him it's urgent. There was a pause. Then Chen's voice came on the line. Dr. Thorne? What's the situation? The situation, Aria said, watching as mercenaries began loading unconscious wolves into some kind of specialized transport containers, is that your company just made the biggest mistake of its corporate existence. I'm not sure what you mean. I know what Silvermoon really is. I know what you're really doing. And I know that you just committed multiple federal crimes on camera. She held up her phone, showing the video she had been recording since the attack began. Assault with deadly weapons, kidnapping, violation of the Endangered Species Act, trespassing on protected lands. Should I continue? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for long seconds. Dr. Thorne, Chen said finally, his voice carefully controlled, I think there may be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is that you thought you could hunt endangered species on American soil without consequences. Aria kept her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Call off your extraction team, Chen.
Right now.
Before this becomes an international incident. I'm afraid that's not possible. Then you're about to discover what happens when environmental scientists go to war with corporations. Aria could hear sirens in the distance now, getting closer. Because I'm not just going to file a report recommending against your project. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what Silvermoon Corporation really does in those remote locations you target. The helicopters were landing now, their rotors creating windstorms that bent the trees and sent debris flying through the clearing. Aria could see the mercenaries loading their unconscious captives aboard, working with practiced efficiency, including Cade. You have 30 seconds to stop this, she told Chen, desperation creeping into her voice. 30 seconds before I send this video to every environmental organization, government agency, and news outlet in my contacts list. Dr. Thorne, Chen's voice had gone cold. You're making a very serious mistake. No, Aria replied, watching as the helicopter carrying Cade began to lift off. You are. She ended the call and immediately began uploading the video to every cloud storage service she had access to. Whatever happened next, there would be evidence of what she had witnessed. Proof of what Silvermoon Corporation really was. But as the helicopters disappeared into the night sky, carrying away the people she had come to care about, Aria realized that evidence might not be enough. She was alone in the wilderness, surrounded by the aftermath of a battle that officially had never happened, holding secrets that could get her killed, and carrying the weight of an entire species' survival on her shoulders. The sirens were getting closer, but she knew that by the time law enforcement arrived, all they would find was an environmental scientist with an incredible story and no evidence except a video that could be dismissed as elaborate special effects. Unless she could find another way to fight back. Unless she could find a way to save them. The pack bond Cade had described might have been severed by chemicals, but Aria's commitment to protecting what mattered had never been stronger. Silvermoon Corporation had no idea what they had just awakened. Chapter 7. The Pierce County Sheriff's Department arrived 43 minutes after Aria's 911 call, their flashing lights painting the forest in alternating red and blue as they swept the area for evidence of the assault she had reported. What they found was a property that looked like it had been hit by a small tornado, damaged trees, scattered equipment, and signs of a significant struggle, but no bodies, no weapons, and no witnesses except for one very shaken environmental scientist. Dr. Thorne. Sheriff Martinez was a weathered man in his 50s who looked like he had seen enough strange things in his career to take most reports seriously. Can you walk me through what happened here? Aria sat on the front porch of Cade's house, wrapped in a blanket one of the deputies had provided, and carefully recited the story she had prepared during the endless minutes waiting for law enforcement to arrive. Armed men had attacked the property. The owner, Cade Blackthorne, had tried to defend his home. There had been helicopters, abduction, a clear case of kidnapping and assault. What she didn't mention were the werewolves. And you say these men were connected to your employer? Martinez asked, consulting his notes. I believe so. The timing is too convenient to be coincidental. I was here conducting an environmental assessment for Silvermoon Corporation, and suddenly armed mercenaries show up on the property. Aria pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Sheriff, I have video evidence of some of what happened. She handed him her phone, showing the footage she had managed to capture. It was chaotic, dark, and the supernatural elements were obscured by shadows and distance, but it clearly showed armed men attacking what appeared to be local wildlife with tranquilizer weapons and loading unconscious animals into helicopter transport containers. Jesus, Martinez muttered, watching the video. This is some kind of poaching operation? Worse than that. I think it's connected to illegal wildlife trafficking, possibly even exotic animal research. The lies came easily now, a necessary fiction to protect truths that the world wasn't ready to handle. Silvermoon has been targeting properties with unique biodiversity. I think they're harvesting endangered species for private research facilities. Martinez's expression grew grim. We'll need copies of this footage for evidence. And we'll be contacting the FBI. This crosses into federal jurisdiction with the helicopters and what looks like paramilitary equipment. Of course. I want these people found and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. What Aria really wanted was to find Cade and his pack before Silvermoon's researchers did irreversible damage to them. But she knew the human legal system would be too slow, too limited, too bound by a reality that didn't include werewolves. She was going to have to find another way. 3 hours later, after giving her statement to federal agents who had arrived to take over the investigation, Aria finally found herself alone in Cade's house. The law enforcement teams had finished processing the scene and departed, promising to keep her informed as the investigation progressed. The silence was deafening. She moved through rooms that still carried Cade's scent, cedar and wild places, with an underlying musk that she now recognized as distinctly non-human. Every surface reminded her of their conversations, their growing connection, the moment when he had trusted her with the truth about what he was. And now he was gone, taken by people who saw him as nothing more than a research specimen. Aria settled at his desk and opened her laptop, determined to find a way to locate Silvermoon's research facilities. If she could identify where they had taken Cade and the others, she could at least provide that information to law enforcement or... Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. Dr. Thorne. The voice was female, crisp and professional. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, Thomas Chen's daughter. I believe we need to talk. I have nothing to say to anyone from Silvermoon Corporation. I'm not calling as a representative of Silvermoon. I'm calling as someone who has been trying to expose their illegal operations for the past 2 years. There was a pause. I know what they took from Blackthorne's property, Dr. Thorne, and I know how to find them. Aria's grip tightened on the phone. How do I know this isn't a trap? Because if it was a trap, you'd already be dead. Silvermoon doesn't usually leave witnesses to their extraction operations. Dr. Chen's voice carried a weight of bitter experience. Meet me tomorrow morning at Pike Place Market, the coffee shop on the 2nd level. Come alone and bring any research you have on unusual wildlife behavior in the Pacific Northwest. The line went dead. Aria stared at her phone, weighing her options. It could absolutely be a trap, a way for Silvermoon to eliminate the last person who knew the truth about their operations. But it could also be exactly what it seemed, someone on the inside who was willing to help her find Cade and his pack. She had to take the chance. That night, alone in Cade's house, Aria dreamed of golden eyes and midnight howls, of strong hands that could be gentle and a voice that could command respect from both boardroom executives and apex predators. She dreamed of the moment when he had knelt in front of her in the ancient stone circle, trusting her with secrets that could destroy his entire world. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a determination that burned like fire in her chest. The next morning, she drove the 3 hours to Seattle in Cade's black SUV, having found his keys on the kitchen counter next to a note that simply said, "Emergency contacts," with a list of phone numbers she didn't recognize. Everything about using his vehicle, staying in his house, taking on his responsibilities felt like wearing clothes that were too big for her, but she didn't have any other choice. Pike Place Market was crowded even on a Tuesday morning, tourists and locals mixing in the organized chaos of one of Seattle's most famous attractions. Aria found the coffee shop Dr. Chun had specified and ordered a latte, choosing a table where she could watch both entrances. She didn't have to wait long. Dr. Sarah Chun looked nothing like her father. Where Thomas Chun was polished corporate executive, his daughter was clearly academic, practical clothes, minimal makeup, and the kind of intense focus that Aria recognized in fellow researchers. She was also younger than Aria had expected, probably early 30s, with prematurely gray streaking through her black hair. Dr. Thorne. She sat down across from Aria without preamble. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Chun. I have to admit, I'm surprised by this contact. Your father seemed quite invested in Silvermoon's success." "My father built Silvermoon Corporation from the ground up over 20 years ago. It started as a legitimate environmental consulting firm." Sarah's expression was pained. "It wasn't until about 5 years ago that I discovered what it had become." "And what has it become?" Sarah pulled out a tablet and swiped to a series of photographs that made Aria's blood run cold. Research facilities that looked more like prisons, animals in cages that were clearly suffering, and worst of all, documentation that used clinical language to describe what were obviously torture protocols disguised as scientific research. A front for bioweapons development, using supernatural beings as test subjects. Sarah's voice was barely audible above the coffee shop's ambient noise. "They're not just hunting werewolves, Dr. Thorne. They're trying to weaponize their abilities." Aria felt sick. Weaponize how? Enhance soldiers with supernatural strength and speed. Interrogation techniques that exploit pack bonding. Chemical weapons designed specifically to incapacitate supernatural beings. Sarah closed the tablet, as if she couldn't bear to look at the images any longer. "They've been operating under the cover of environmental assessment for years, identifying and capturing supernatural communities across North America. And your father? Knows exactly what's happening and considers it the future of national security." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "He thinks he's protecting humanity from supernatural threats. In reality, he's created the very threat he claims to be defending against." Aria leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. "Why are you telling me this? Why are you willing to betray your own father?" "Because what's happening isn't science, Dr. Thorne. It's genocide. And because I've seen what happens to the test subjects in those facilities." Sarah met her gaze directly. "They don't survive the research protocols. None of them." The words hit Aria like a physical blow. If Sarah was right, if the werewolves taken from Cade's property were being used for bioweapons research, then time was running out faster than she had imagined. "Where are they?" she asked urgently. "Where has Silvermoon taken them?" Sarah consulted her phone, scrolling through what looked like encrypted messages. "Based on the transport logs I was able to access, they were taken to a facility in Eastern Oregon. Officially, it's listed as a wildlife rehabilitation center. Unofficially, it's one of Silvermoon's primary research installations." "How far?" "About 4 hours by car." "But Dr. Thorne, you need to understand, this isn't a rescue mission you can undertake alone. These facilities are heavily guarded, and my father's people will shoot first and ask questions later if they detect any kind of infiltration attempt." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with some internal decision. Finally, she leaned forward and lowered her voice even further. "There's a group of people who have been working to expose Silvermoon's operations. Researchers, former employees, family members of victims. We call ourselves the Haven Network." She slid a business card across the table. "There's a phone number on the back. Call it tonight at exactly 9 p.m. Someone will explain how we can help each other." Aria pocketed the card. "What do you get out of this? What's your motivation?" "My younger brother was born with a genetic condition that gave him unusual abilities. Enhanced senses, remarkable physical capabilities, the ability to influence animals in ways that defied explanation." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "When he was 16, Silvermoon recruited him for a special research program. They told our family it was an opportunity to help other children with similar conditions. What happened to him? He became subject number 47 in their enhanced soldier program. He lasted 3 months before the experimental procedures killed him. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. So my motivation, Dr. Thorne, is making sure no other family goes through what mine did. They parted ways after finalizing details for the evening call, and Aria spent the rest of the day researching everything she could find about the facility in Eastern Oregon. Officially, the Cascade Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was a model facility dedicated to treating injured native species and preparing them for return to the wild. The website featured heartwarming success stories, professional staff credentials, and images of happy animals being released back into their natural habitats. But when Aria dug deeper, using research techniques she had learned for investigating corporate environmental violations, she found disturbing discrepancies. The facility received federal funding far in excess of what similar organizations were allocated. Their staff roster included several individuals with military backgrounds and advanced degrees in biochemistry rather than veterinary medicine. And their rehabilitation success rate was exactly 0. No animals were ever documented as being released back into the wild. At exactly 9 p.m., she dialed the number Sarah had given her. Haven Network Secure Line. This is Dr. Aria Thorne. Sarah Chin told me to call. Dr. Thorne, we've been expecting your call. Please hold while I connect you to our operations coordinator. There was a brief pause, then a new voice came on the line, male, older, with the kind of authority that suggested military or law enforcement background. Dr. Thorne, this is Commander Hayes. Sarah briefed us on your situation. We understand you have people being held at the Cascade facility.
Yes.
Several individuals who were taken during an illegal extraction operation 2 nights ago. We're familiar with Silvermoon's extraction protocols. Time is a critical factor here. Their research subjects rarely survive more than 72 hours once the testing begins. Hayes's voice was professionally calm, but Aria could hear the urgency beneath it. We're prepared to mount a rescue operation, but we'll need your help. What kind of help? You're the only person who has direct knowledge of the individuals who were taken, their physical conditions, and any special circumstances we need to be aware of during extraction. There was a pause. And frankly, Dr. Thorne, you're the only one with the motivation to see this through to the end, regardless of the personal cost. Aria felt her pulse quicken. What exactly are you proposing? A joint operation to infiltrate the Cascade facility, locate and extract the captives, and gather evidence of Silvermoon's illegal activities for federal prosecution. Hayes's tone became more serious. I won't lie to you. This is a high-risk operation with significant potential for casualties. But it's also the only chance those people have of surviving. When? Tomorrow night. We'll rendezvous at a staging area approximately 20 miles from the facility at 10 p.m. Can you be there? Aria looked around Cade's house, at the photographs of wild places and the books about conservation and the life he had built protecting what mattered to him. She thought about golden eyes and midnight howls, about the way he had trusted her with secrets that could destroy his world, about the pack members who had risked their lives to protect her during the attack.
I'll be there, she said.
Dr. Thorne, Hayes added, you should know that once you commit to this operation, there's no going back. Silvermoon will consider you a permanent threat to their interests. Your old life, your career, everything you've built, it will all be at risk. Commander Hayes, Aria replied, thinking of Cade unconscious and helpless in some research facility. My old life ended the moment those helicopters took off. I'm all in. After ending the call, she spent the rest of the evening preparing for what might be her last night of freedom. She organized her research files, uploaded backup copies of all her evidence to secure cloud servers, and wrote letters to her parents and closest friends, letters she hoped they would never have to read. Then she sat in Cade's living room, surrounded by the scent of wild places and the memory of a man who had shown her that the world was larger, more dangerous, and more magical than she had ever imagined. Tomorrow night, she would either save him or die trying. But first, she would give him something no one else could, a human willing to fight for werewolves not because she had to, but because she had chosen to. Because love, it turned out, was stronger than species boundaries, corporate power, or even the fear of death. She was about to become something Silvermoon Corporation had never encountered before, an environmental scientist at war. And she intended to win. Chapter 8. The staging area for the rescue operation was an abandoned logging camp 20 miles east of the Cascade Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, hidden deep enough in the Oregon wilderness that satellite surveillance would dismiss it as natural forest clearing. Aria arrived at 9:47 p.m., her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel of Cade's SUV, her mind cycling through everything that could go wrong with what they were about to attempt. The Haven Network had assembled an impressive team for the operation. Commander Hayes turned out to be a silver-haired man in his 60s with the bearing of someone accustomed to leading dangerous missions, flanked by 6 operatives who moved with a kind of quiet competence that suggested special forces backgrounds. But what surprised Aria most was the diversity of the group, not just former military personnel, but researchers, activists, and what appeared to be several individuals whose enhanced physical capabilities suggested they weren't entirely human themselves. Dr. Thorne. Commander Hayes stepped forward as she parked. Glad you could make it. Let me introduce you to the team. The introductions were swift and professional. Marcus Webb, tactical coordinator and demolitions expert. Elena Rodriguez, surveillance and communications. David Chun, Sarah's cousin, and a reformed Silvermoon security officer who had inside knowledge of the facility's layout. And 3 others whose names Aria didn't catch, but whose eyes reflected light in ways that reminded her uncomfortably of Cade's golden gaze. Mixed team, she observed quietly to Hayes as they moved toward a camouflaged command trailer. Supernatural communities and their human allies, Hayes confirmed. We've learned that the most effective operations require both perspectives. Your people understand Silvermoon's corporate structure and legal vulnerabilities. Our people understand what the captives are going through and how to safely extract them without triggering their trauma responses. Our people. Aria realized that somewhere in the past 48 hours, she had stopped thinking of werewolves as subjects of study and started thinking of them as her community. The shift should have been jarring, but instead it felt like coming home to a truth she had always known but never acknowledged. Inside the command trailer, detailed schematics of the Cascade facility covered every available surface. The building was larger than Aria had expected, 3 stories above ground, with what appeared to be extensive basement levels that didn't appear on any official architectural plans. David, walk us through the layout, Hayes commanded. David Chin stepped forward, his expression grim. Ground floor is administrative and public areas, reception, offices for the legitimate wildlife rehabilitation programs they use as cover. Second floor is staff quarters and equipment storage. Third floor is where things get interesting. He pointed to a section of the schematic highlighted in red. Research laboratories, medical facilities, and what they euphemistically call subject housing. That's where your people will be held. Security? Aria asked. Extensive. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, armed patrols on rotating schedules. But the real challenge isn't getting in, it's getting out with multiple unconscious captives who will be in various stages of physical and psychological trauma. Elena Rodriguez looked up from her laptop. I've been monitoring their communications for the past 6 hours. There's been a significant increase in research activity since the new subjects arrived. They're accelerating their testing protocols. Meaning?
Hayes asked.
Meaning they're not planning for these subjects to survive long enough for extraction by outside forces. Elena's expression was stone-cold professional, but Aria could see the anger burning beneath the surface. They know someone is coming, so they're rushing to gather as much data as possible before destroying the evidence. Aria felt sick. How long do we have? Based on the communication patterns, I'd estimate 6 to 8 hours before they begin what they call terminal procedures. Elena's fingers moved across her keyboard, pulling up intercepted message logs. After that, there won't be anything left to rescue. The trailer fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of wind through the trees. 6 to 8 hours. It was already past 10 p.m., which meant they had until dawn, maybe a little longer, to infiltrate a heavily secured facility, locate and extract an unknown number of werewolves, and escape without getting everyone killed in the process. The plan, Hayes said, moving to a tactical map, is a three-pronged approach. Team Alpha will create a diversion at the main entrance, drawing security away from the research levels. Team Beta will infiltrate through the service tunnels in the basement and work their way up to the holding areas. Team Charlie will provide overwatch and extraction support. Which team am I on? Aria asked. Hayes looked at her steadily. You're with Team Beta. We need someone who can identify the specific individuals we're looking for and assess their condition for transport. And if we encounter Silvermoon personnel? Non-lethal force only, unless they pose an immediate threat to the captives or team members. Hayes's expression was grave. We're not assassins, Dr. Thorne. We're rescue operators. But make no mistake, if they force us to choose between their lives and the lives of the people we're trying to save, we will choose our people every time. The next hour was spent reviewing floor plans, communication protocols, and extraction procedures. Aria was issued tactical gear, body armor, communications headset, and a sidearm she hoped she wouldn't need to use. The weight of the equipment felt foreign and frightening, a physical reminder of how far she had traveled from her comfortable life as an environmental scientist. At midnight, they loaded into modified vehicles and began the approach to the facility. Aria rode with Team Beta, squeezed between David Chen and one of the operatives whose enhanced senses had detected the approach of Silvermoon security patrols from over a mile away. First time? David asked quietly as they navigated the dark forest roads. First time breaking into a paramilitary research facility to rescue kidnapped werewolves? Yeah, definitely a first. Aria tried to keep her voice light, but her hands were shaking. It gets easier, David said, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of his own words. The important thing to remember is that the people in there, they're counting on us. They don't have anyone else. What made you switch sides? Aria asked. You worked for Silvermoon. You knew what they were doing. David was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. I had a partner, another security officer. We'd been working together for 2 years, and I thought I knew everything about him. David stared out the window at the passing trees. Turned out he was one of the supernatural individuals Silvermoon was hunting. A werewolf who had been trying to gather intelligence on their operations from the inside. What happened to him? When they found out what he was, they made him a test subject. I watched them torture him for 3 weeks before his heart finally stopped. David's hands clenched into fists. That's when I realized that everything I thought I was protecting humanity from was actually just another form of humanity that I hadn't understood. The convoy stopped half a mile from the facility, and Team Beta deployed on foot through the forest. Moving in single file, they approached the target building from the north, where David's intelligence suggested the weakest security coverage. The Cascade Wildlife Rehabilitation Center looked nothing like the cheerful facility depicted on their website. Floodlights created harsh pools of illumination around a concrete structure that resembled a prison more than a research center. Guard towers at each corner were manned by armed personnel, and motion sensors swept the approaches with mechanical precision. There, David whispered, pointing to a storm drainage pipe that disappeared into the building's foundation. Service tunnel access. It should take us directly into the basement levels. The tunnel was cramped, dark, and filled with the kind of industrial smells that spoke of chemicals and machinery. Aria crawled through the confined space, trying not to think about what would happen if they were discovered before reaching their objective. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they emerged in a basement storage area filled with equipment that definitely wasn't designed for wildlife rehabilitation. Cages specifically sized for human beings. Medical apparatus that looked more like torture devices. And chemical storage tanks labeled with compounds that Aria didn't recognize, but that made her skin crawl just reading the names. Jesus, she whispered. Stay focused, David warned. The holding areas are 2 floors up. We need to move quickly and quietly. They climbed service stairs that hadn't appeared on any of the official building plans, their footsteps muffled by sound-dampening materials that suggested the facility's architects had wanted to prevent anyone from hearing what happened in the upper levels. The third floor was a maze of laboratories and medical facilities that looked like something from a science fiction nightmare. Through reinforced glass windows, Aria could see research equipment that was definitely not designed for studying normal wildlife. Surgical suites with restraint systems. Monitoring devices that looked like they belonged in an intensive care unit, if intensive care units were designed by sadists. And then she heard it. A low, pained howling that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "That way," she said, pointing toward the sound. They followed the corridor deeper into the facility, past laboratories filled with equipment she didn't want to examine too closely, until they reached a section that was clearly the subject housing David had described. The holding area was exactly what Aria had feared, a row of reinforced cells designed to contain dangerous predators. But the predators in these cells were people who had been reduced to broken, barely conscious forms by whatever Silvamoon's researchers had done to them. "Cade." Aria pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the nearest cell, where she could see a familiar figure lying motionless on the floor. He was alive, but barely. His skin was pale and drawn, his breathing shallow, and she could see injection sites and monitoring leads attached to various parts of his body. Whatever they had been doing to him had pushed his supernatural healing abilities beyond their limits. "Can you get it open?" she asked David urgently. "Working on it." David was already interfacing with the electronic lock system, his fingers flying over a device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a military-grade computer. These locks are designed to contain supernatural beings. The security protocols are extensive. How extensive? The kind that will trigger facility-wide alerts if I make a mistake. Aria looked down the corridor at the other cells, counting at least 6 more unconscious figures that she recognized from the attack on Cade's property. "Can you get them all?" "Maybe. But not quietly. Once I start opening cells, we'll have maybe 5 minutes before every security officer in the building comes looking for us." "Do it." David looked at her sharply. "Dr. Thorne, if we trigger the alarms. If we don't get them out of here in the next few hours, they're going to be dead anyway." Aria met his gaze steadily. "Do it." The first lock disengaged with a soft electronic chirp, and Aria rushed into Cade's cell. Up close, she could see the full extent of what had been done to him: surgical incisions, injection sites, monitoring equipment that had been surgically implanted under his skin. "Cade," she whispered, touching his face gently. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she saw confusion and pain. Then recognition dawned, followed by something that might have been wonder. "Aria?" His voice was barely a whisper. Why are you here?" "Because no one gets left behind," she said, helping him sit up. "Can you stand?" Maybe." Cade struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on her for support. "The others are the others?" "We're getting everyone out." Aria supported his weight as David continued working on the other cells. "How bad is it? What did they do to you?"
"Tests."
"Chemical injections." They were trying to isolate the genetic factors that trigger transformation. Cade's voice was getting stronger, his supernatural healing already beginning to repair the damage now that the torture had stopped. "They wanted to create artificial werewolves. Super soldiers with our abilities, but without our inconvenient loyalties to pack and territory." "Did they succeed?"
"No."
"But they killed 3 others trying." Cade's eyes hardened, and for a moment Aria could see the Alpha reasserting itself despite his weakened condition. "Marcus. Elena. Where are Marcus and Elena?" "I don't know. We're still opening cells." Alarms began blaring throughout the facility, red lights flashing in the corridors as automated systems announced a security breach. "That's our cue to leave," David said grimly, working faster on the remaining locks. "How many more?" Aria asked.
2.
"But we've got maybe 3 minutes before security arrives in force." The remaining cells contained pack members who were in even worse condition than Cade, barely conscious, unable to walk without assistance, some showing signs of surgical procedures that had been interrupted by their arrival. "We can't carry them all," David said, looking at the 6 unconscious werewolves they had extracted. Yes, we can. Cade had managed to remain upright, and his voice now carried the unmistakable tone of alpha authority. Marcus, Elena, wake up. The pack needs you. At the sound of his voice, two of the unconscious figures stirred. It was subtle, nothing that normal human senses would have detected, but Aria could see the shift in their breathing, the way they responded to their alpha's call even while drugged and traumatized. Pack bond, Cade explained, seeing her expression. It works both ways. I can call them back to consciousness, and they can draw strength from my presence. Within minutes, the rescued werewolves were mobile, not fully recovered, but able to move under their own power with assistance. Cade had somehow managed to awaken not just their consciousness, but their supernatural healing abilities, accelerating their recovery beyond anything normal human medicine could have achieved. This way, David urged, leading them toward a fire exit that should take them directly to the extraction point. But as they reached the stairwell, the door burst open and armed Silvermoon security personnel flooded into the corridor. Subjects are escaping. Repeat, subjects are escaping. The security chief raised his weapon toward Cade. Aria didn't think. She stepped between the gun and the man she loved, her hands raised in a gesture that was part surrender, part shield. Don't, she said, her voice carrying more authority than she had known she possessed. These people are under federal protection. You have no legal right to hold them. Dr. Thorne. The security chief's smile was cold and predatory. Mr. Chun has been very concerned about your welfare. You've been missing for several days. I haven't been missing. I've been documenting federal crimes committed by your employer. Aria pulled out her phone, showing the recording app that had been running since they entered the facility. Everything that's happened here tonight is being transmitted in real time to federal agencies and media outlets. It was a bluff. Her phone had no signal this deep in the building, but the security chief's hesitation suggested it was an effective one. Stand down, a new voice commanded from behind the security team. Thomas Chin stepped into the corridor, flanked by more armed personnel. But his attention wasn't focused on the escaped werewolves or even on his security team. His eyes were locked on Aria with the kind of predatory intensity that made her skin crawl. Dr. Aria Thorne, he said, his voice carrying mock concern. Such a brilliant scientist. Such a shame that you chose the wrong side in this conflict. The only side I chose was the truth, Aria replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. And the truth is that Silvermoon Corporation has been committing crimes against humanity under the cover of environmental research. Humanity. Chun laughed, but there was no humor in it. These creatures aren't human, Dr. Thorne. They're predators wearing human faces, and they represent an existential threat to our species. The only existential threat I see is the one created by people like you. Aria could feel Cade behind her, still weak, but drawing strength from her presence, just as she was drawing strength from his. People who see intelligence and consciousness as something to be exploited rather than respected. Chen's expression hardened. You've cost me millions of dollars in research, Dr. Thorne. You've destroyed years of work. And you've compromised operations that could have revolutionized human defense capabilities. Good, Aria said simply. That single word seemed to break whatever restraint Chen had been maintaining. He nodded to his security team, and Aria saw weapons being raised, safeties being disengaged. Then the lights went out. In the darkness that followed, all hell broke loose. Emergency lighting cast everything in blood-red shadows as the Haven Network's assault teams breached the building from multiple directions. Gunfire echoed through the corridors, mixed with shouting and the sound of running feet. Go! Cade's voice carried the full force of Alpha Command. Everyone out now. But as they moved toward the emergency exit, Aria realized that Chen's security team wasn't trying to recapture the werewolves, they were trying to kill them. This wasn't about research anymore, it was about eliminating witnesses and destroying evidence. The stairwell became a battlefield as Haven Network operatives engaged Silvermoon security in a running firefight that echoed through the concrete structure like thunder. Aria found herself pressed against Cade's side, both of them shielding the other rescued werewolves as they descended toward what they hoped was safety. Almost there, David called from the front of their group. Exits just ahead. But when they reached the ground floor, they found their way blocked by more security personnel. These weren't the corporate guards from upstairs. They were military contractors with the kind of equipment and training that suggested this had always been more than a research facility. End of the line, the team leader announced, raising an automatic weapon. Dr. Thorne, step away from the subjects. Mr. Chen wants to speak with you privately. Like hell, Aria replied. And that's when she discovered what it really meant to be under the protection of an alpha werewolf. Cade's transformation was nothing like what she had witnessed during the attack on his property. This wasn't the fluid, controlled shift she had seen before. This was raw fury given supernatural form, the rage of a predator whose pack had been threatened, unleashed without restraint. The security team never had a chance. When the violence ended, they stood in a corridor filled with unconscious men and the echo of Cade's roar still reverberating through the building. He had resumed human form, but his eyes still burned with golden fire, and his hands were stained with blood that wasn't his own. "Are you hurt?" he asked Aria, his voice rough with the aftermath of transformation.
No.
"You? I'll heal." Cade looked around at his rescued pack members, his expression softening with relief. "We all will." They emerged from the Cascade facility to find the parking lot filled with Haven network vehicles and the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. Federal agents, Aria realized, the real ones, not the corporate security masquerading as law enforcement. Dr. Thorne, Commander Hayes jogged toward them, relief evident in his expression. Status report. Mission successful. All captives recovered. Evidence secured. Aria looked back at the building they had just escaped, where fires were now burning on multiple floors and the sound of secondary explosions suggested that someone was destroying research data. "Though I suspect there won't be much left for the federal investigation." "That's all right," Hayes replied, pulling out his own phone. "We got what we came for, the people. Everything else is just paperwork." As sirens grew louder and the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, Aria realized that her old life was truly over. There would be no going back to her comfortable career as an environmental scientist, no returning to a world where the greatest mysteries were corporate pollution and habitat destruction. She was part of something larger now, something more dangerous and more meaningful than anything she had ever imagined. And standing beside Cade Blackthorne, alpha werewolf, protector of the supernatural community and the man who had become the center of her new world, she discovered that she wouldn't change a thing. Chapter 9. 2 weeks later, Aria stood on the front porch of Cade's mountain home, watching the morning mist rise from the valley below as she sipped coffee that had become a ritual of normalcy in a life that was anything but normal. The federal investigation into Silvermoon Corporation had made headlines across the country, but the full truth, the supernatural elements that had motivated the company's illegal research, remained classified at levels that suggested government knowledge of werewolf communities went far deeper than anyone had imagined. "Penny for your thoughts." Cade's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar in ways that still made her pulse quicken. She leaned back against his chest as his arms wrapped around her waist, marveling at how right it felt to be held by someone whose strength could crush steel but whose touch was always gentle with her. "Just thinking about how much has changed in 3 weeks," she said, covering his hands with her own. "A month ago, I was Dr. Aria Thorne, environmental scientist. Now what exactly am I?" "You're Dr. Aria Thorne, alpha female of the Blackthorne pack." Cade's voice carried quiet certainty. "You're the woman who risked everything to save people she barely knew because it was the right thing to do. You're the human who looked at a werewolf and saw not a monster, but a person worth protecting." Alpha female. The title still felt strange, but increasingly right. Over the past 2 weeks, she had found herself naturally falling into a leadership role within the pack community, not because anyone had asked her to, but because problems kept arising that needed her particular combination of scientific training, corporate experience, and stubborn determination to solve. "Speaking of which," she said, turning in his arms to face him, "Marcus called this morning. The federal task force wants another briefing on Silvermoon's research protocols. They're still trying to understand what they found in the facility wreckage." "What did you tell him?" that I'd be happy to provide technical consultation, but that certain details would remain classified for security reasons. Aria smiled at Cade's expression.
Don't worry.
I'm getting very good at giving government officials just enough truth to satisfy their curiosity without revealing anything that could endanger the supernatural community. And they're accepting that? They don't have much choice. As far as official records show, Silvermoon was conducting illegal medical experiments on endangered wildlife. The genetic samples they recovered are consistent with wolf DNA, and the research protocols were clearly designed for biological warfare applications. Aria's expression grew serious. What happened to your people was horrible, but from the outside, it looks like corporate bioweapons development using animal subjects. It was a necessary fiction, one that allowed the human authorities to prosecute Silvermoon's remaining leadership while protecting the werewolf community from exposure. Thomas Chen had been arrested on charges including kidnapping, illegal medical experimentation, and violations of the Biological Weapons Convention. He would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, never knowing how close he had come to discovering an entire hidden species. How are the others recovering? Aria asked, referring to the pack members who had been rescued from the facility. Physically, they're almost back to full strength. Supernatural healing has its advantages. Cade's expression darkened slightly. Psychologically, it's going to take time. What Silvermoon did to them violated every principle of pack law, every understanding we have of acceptable behavior between intelligent beings. And the three who didn't survive. We honored them according to our traditions. Their sacrifice won't be forgotten. Cade's voice carried the weight of alpha responsibility, the burden of every pack member's welfare, living or dead. But their deaths also strengthen our resolve to ensure nothing like this happens again. That resolve had already manifested in concrete changes. The Haven Network had evolved from a loose collection of activists and refugees into a coordinated intelligence operation that monitored potential threats to supernatural communities across North America. Other werewolf packs had reached out to establish communication and mutual defense agreements. And perhaps most significantly, a handful of humans with security clearances high enough to know the truth had begun quietly establishing legal frameworks to protect supernatural beings without officially acknowledging their existence. Elena's here, Cade said, nodding toward the driveway where his former pack enforcer was parking her motorcycle. Elena Rodriguez had recovered from her injuries faster than anyone except Cade himself, and she had thrown herself into expanding the pack's security operations with the focused intensity of someone who never intended to be captured again. She had also become one of Aria's closest allies in navigating the complex politics of werewolf society. Aria, Elena called as she approached the porch. We need to talk. Both of you. What's the situation? Cade asked, immediately shifting into alpha mode. Two things. First, we've identified 3 more Silvermoon research facilities, one in Colorado, one in Northern California, and one in British Columbia. David's intelligence sources suggest they're all being shut down and their research transferred to a new organization with military connections. Military? Aria felt a chill. As in actual government involvement? Unknown. Could be private military contractors, could be a black ops program that's been using Silvermoon as a front. Elena's expression was grim. Either way, it means the threat hasn't ended. It's just changed hands. And the second thing?
Cade asked.
We've been contacted by representatives of other supernatural communities. Apparently, werewolves aren't the only ones who've been targeted by these research programs. Elena pulled out a tablet, showing them a series of photographs that made Aria's scientific worldview expand even further. Vampires, witches, shapeshifters who aren't wolves, beings with abilities that don't fit any category we have names for. They want to meet. Meet where? Aria asked.
Here.
Tomorrow night. They're calling it a Council of the Hidden, representatives from every supernatural community in North America that's been affected by human hunting operations. Elena looked between Cade and Aria. They want to discuss coordinated defense strategies and other options. What kind of other options? The kind that involves stepping out of the shadows, permanently. Revealing ourselves to human society and demanding recognition as a protected species under international law. The implications hit Aria like a physical blow. Everything they had worked for, the careful balance of protecting the supernatural community while maintaining the secret of their existence, could be about to change forever. She began, then stopped, realizing she had no words for the magnitude of what Elena was describing. "It's terrifying," Cade said quietly. "And probably necessary. What Silvermoon did, what other organizations are probably still doing, it proves that hiding in the shadows isn't protecting us anymore. It's just making us easier targets." "But the risks?" Aria protested. "Human society isn't ready for the knowledge that supernatural beings exist. The panic, the fear, the potential for violence on both sides. As opposed to the current situation, where we're being hunted and experimented on without any legal protections or recourse." Elena's voice carried the edge of someone who had experienced those experiments firsthand. "At least if we're public, we can fight back openly." They spent the rest of the morning discussing the implications of the proposed council meeting, but Aria found her thoughts circling back to a more personal question. What would revelation mean for her relationship with Cade? As if reading her mind, he found her later that afternoon in his study, where she was reviewing intelligence reports on the remaining Silvermoon facilities. "You're worried about tomorrow night," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Among other things." Aria closed her laptop and looked at him directly. "Cade, if the supernatural community decides to reveal itself publicly, everything changes. For all of us, but especially for humans who have been involved in pack affairs." "You mean especially for you?" "I mean that being the human mate of a werewolf alpha is complicated enough when it's a secret. If werewolves become public knowledge..." She gestured helplessly. "I'd become a symbol. A political statement. The human woman who chose a supernatural partner, either held up as an example of species cooperation or vilified as a traitor to her own kind." Cade was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes studying her with the intensity that had first caught her attention in Silvermoon's conference room. Finally, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Are you having second thoughts about us?"
"No."
The answer came, without hesitation. "Never about us. But I'm terrified about what the world might do to us if we become public figures in an interspecies conflict. Then we make sure we're not public figures." Cade reached across the desk to take her hands. "Aria, I've been alpha of this pack for 12 years. I've made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, defended territory against enemies who wanted to see us extinct, and carried the weight of my people's survival on my shoulders since I was 20 years old. I know. But none of that matters compared to keeping you safe. If revealing the supernatural community would put you in danger, then I'll argue against revelation. If it would force you to choose between your human life and your place in our world, then we'll find another way." Aria felt tears pricking her eyes. "You can't make that choice, Cade. Your responsibility is to your pack, to the entire werewolf community. You can't sacrifice their safety for one person." "I can and I will." His voice carried the absolute certainty of alpha authority. "Because you're not just one person, Aria. You're my mate, my partner, my equal. And that means your well-being is inseparable from the pack's well-being. Even if it means staying hidden forever?" "Even if it means staying hidden forever." But Aria knew him too well now to believe he would be content with that choice. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the alpha who wanted to protect his people warring with the man who wanted to protect her. "There might be another option," she said slowly, an idea beginning to form. "What kind of option? What if we controlled the revelation? Instead of supernatural communities stepping forward en masse, what if we started smaller? Selective disclosure to key individuals in positions of power who could help establish legal protections before the general public knows the truth." Cade's eyes sharpened with interest. "Go on." "I still have contacts in the environmental community, people in government agencies who trust my judgment. What if we approached them privately, with carefully selected evidence of supernatural communities' contributions to environmental conservation?" Aria pulled up files on her laptop, showing him data she had been compiling. "Look at this. Ecosystem recovery rates on werewolf territories are 3 times higher than in areas managed by human conservation groups. Water quality improvement, species reintroduction success, reforestation efficiency. The environmental benefits of supernatural stewardship are quantifiable. You're talking about framing revelation as an environmental issue rather than a security threat. I'm talking about framing it as an opportunity rather than a crisis. Showing humans that supernatural beings aren't monsters to be feared, but partners in protecting the planet we all share. Aria's excitement grew as the possibilities expanded in her mind. We could start with the scientific community, people who are trained to evaluate evidence objectively and who have influence with policymakers. And if they react badly, then we know before we commit to full disclosure. But if they react positively, Aria smiled, imagining the possibilities. We could have legal protections in place before the general public knows supernatural beings exist. Cade stood and moved to the window, looking out over the territory his family had protected for generations. It would require revealing ourselves to humans we couldn't fully trust, taking enormous risks with no guarantee of success. Yes. It would mean you'd have to take a public role as an intermediary between human and supernatural communities. You'd be giving up any chance of returning to your old life. I gave up that chance the moment I decided to save you from Silvermoon. Aria joined him at the window, taking his hand. Besides, I can't think of any work more important than building bridges between species. And if the council votes for immediate revelation tomorrow night, then we present this as an alternative approach. A way to achieve the same goals with less risk to everyone involved. Aria squeezed his hand. But ultimately, whatever the supernatural community decides, we face it together. Cade turned to face her, his expression intense with the kind of focused attention she was learning to associate with important pact decisions. Together, he repeated. Alpha and alpha female. Partners in everything. Partners in everything, she agreed. He kissed her then, with the passion and certainty that had characterized their relationship from the moment he had trusted her with the truth about what he was. But this kiss felt different, not just desire and affection, but a ceiling of commitment that went beyond personal feelings to encompass shared responsibility for the future of both their communities. When they broke apart, Aria realized that the sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of gold that matched Cade's eyes. Tomorrow night, representatives from supernatural communities across the continent would gather to make decisions that could change the world forever. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. In the arms of the Alpha, who had shown her that love could transcend species boundaries, that partnership could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with trust, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for the people you loved. In the distance, she could hear the evening song beginning. The wolf chorus that had once seemed mysterious and threatening, but now felt like coming home. The pack was calling to each other across the territory, sharing the news of the day, confirming bonds that transcended individual identity. And for the first time since this whole adventure had begun, Aria found herself howling back.
Chapter 10.
The Heartstone clearing had been transformed for the Council of the Hidden. What had once been a sacred space, known only to Cade's pack, now hosted representatives from supernatural communities across North America, their presence turning the ancient grove into something between a diplomatic summit and a war council. Aria stood beside Cade at the edge of the circle, watching as beings she had never imagined existed emerged from the forest in the gathering dusk. Vampires who moved with predatory grace that made werewolves look clumsy. Witches whose very presence seemed to bend reality around them. Shapeshifters who wore human faces but carried the essence of eagles, bears, and creatures she couldn't identify. And others, beings of such alien beauty and power that her scientific mind struggled to categorize them at all. Nervous? Cade asked quietly, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Terrified, she admitted. 3 weeks ago, I didn't know werewolves existed. Now I'm about to participate in a council that could reshape the relationship between supernatural and human civilizations. 3 weeks ago, I was a territorial alpha focused only on protecting my own pack, Cade replied. Now I'm apparently co-leading a coalition that spans species I've only heard about in legends. If you can adapt, so can I. The formal opening of the council was unlike anything Aria had ever witnessed. Each delegation announced themselves not with words, but with displays of power that spoke to capabilities beyond human understanding. The vampire contingent moved through the clearing like living shadows. Their leader, a woman who appeared to be in her 30s, but whose eyes held centuries of experience, stepping forward to place a crystal vial of what looked like liquid moonlight on the central stone. The witch covens came next, representatives from traditions that spanned continents and cultures. Their leader, a man whose skin seemed to shimmer with starlight, spoke words in a language that predated recorded history, and every candle and torch in the clearing blazed to life, without human intervention. The shapeshifter clans followed, their spokesperson shifting fluidly between human and animal forms, eagle to bear to wolf to something that might have been dragon, before settling into a hybrid form that combined the best aspects of each. Other species presented themselves with similar demonstrations, beings who controlled elements, who spoke with the voices of storms, who existed partially outside normal spacetime. And then it was their turn. Cade stepped forward, his presence expanding to fill the clearing with alpha authority that made even the ancient vampires shift with acknowledgement. When he spoke, his voice carried not just to the assembled representatives, but seemed to resonate through the forest itself. I am Cade Blackthorne, Alpha of the Blackthorne Pack, speaker for the North American Werewolf Alliance. He gestured to Aria, drawing her forward. This is Dr. Aria Thorne, my mate and partner, human ally to the supernatural community and architect of the Silver Moon Liberation. The reaction to Aria's introduction was immediate and intense. Dozens of inhuman gazes focused on her with curiosity, calculation, and in some cases, what appeared to be recognition. She realized that her role in rescuing Cade's pack had already become known throughout the hidden supernatural community. A human, the vampire leader observed, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. How interesting. Not just any human, replied the shapeshifter spokesperson, their voice a harmonious blend of animal sounds that somehow formed human words. The one who chose to risk everything to save people she barely knew. The one who looked at monsters and saw persons worth protecting. The one, added the witch representative, his star-touched skin brightening slightly, whose actions may have changed the course of the war between our kinds and theirs. Aria felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. These were beings of immense power and ancient wisdom, and they were looking to her, a human environmental scientist who had stumbled into their world through a combination of stubbornness and circumstance, for guidance on decisions that could affect millions of lives. I'm honored by your confidence, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. But I'm also acutely aware that I'm the least qualified person here to make decisions about supernatural policy. Are you? The vampire leader, who had introduced herself as Selene Nightwhisper, first of her line, moved closer with that fluid, predatory grace. You understand human government structures, human psychology, human fears and prejudices in ways that none of us can. More importantly, you've proven that humans and supernatural beings can work together as equals rather than predator and prey. Which brings us to the reason we're here, said a new voice from the edge of the clearing. All heads turned toward the speaker, a figure who seemed to exist partially in shadow, their form shifting between solid and translucent. When they spoke, their voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I am Echo, speaker for those who exist between worlds. We have called this council because the old ways of hiding, of existing in the shadows of human civilization, are no longer sufficient to protect us. The enemy has evolved. They have technology, resources, and now military support that makes concealment more dangerous than revelation. Tell them about the new facilities. Elena's voice came from behind Aria, where she stood with Marcus and the other pack members who served as Cade's advisory council. Echo nodded, their form solidifying slightly as they accessed information that seemed to come from sources beyond normal human intelligence gathering. Silver Moon Corporation was merely the civilian face of a much larger operation. Our sources indicate that military contractors have established at least 12 facilities across North America specifically designed for capturing and studying supernatural beings. Their stated goal is the development of enhanced human soldiers with supernatural capabilities. A ripple of anger ran through the assembled representatives, manifesting in ways that made the air itself seem to crackle with barely restrained power. But their real goal, Echo continued, is far more sinister. They believe supernatural beings represent an evolutionary threat to human dominance. Their ultimate objective is not integration or cooperation, but extermination disguised as research. Genocide, Selene said flatly. They're planning genocide. Which is why we must act, declared the shapeshifter spokesperson, their form shifting to something more predatory as their emotions responded to the threat. We cannot continue to hide while they hunt us systematically. We must reveal ourselves, demand legal protections, and be prepared to defend those rights with force if necessary. And trigger a war between supernatural beings and 7 billion humans. Cade's voice cut through the rising tension. Even if we won such a conflict, which is far from certain, the cost would be catastrophic for both sides. Then what do you propose? Asked the witch representative, his starlight skin flickering with what might have been irritation. Cade looked at Aria, and she stepped forward, feeling the weight of every supernatural gaze in the clearing. A strategic revelation, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. Instead of mass disclosure that would trigger panic and potentially violence, we approach key individuals in human government and scientific communities. People with the influence to establish legal frameworks and the intelligence to understand the benefits of cooperation rather than conflict. And if they refuse cooperation? Selene asked. If they choose to see us as threats rather than allies? Then we reveal ourselves publicly, but from a position of strength rather than desperation. Aria pulled out her tablet, showing the research she had compiled over the past weeks. Look at these environmental recovery statistics from territories managed by supernatural communities. Species reintroduction success rates, ecosystem restoration, water quality improvement. The data shows that supernatural stewardship produces results that human conservation efforts can't match. She moved to the next slide, showing economic analyses that had taken her days to compile. Now look at the potential economic benefits of supernatural human cooperation. Enhanced medical research using werewolf healing factors could revolutionize treatment for everything from cancer to spinal cord injuries. Vampire longevity studies could extend human lifespan by centuries. Which agricultural techniques could end world hunger. Shapeshifter environmental adaptation could help humans survive climate change. The clearing fell silent as the assembled representatives absorbed the implications of what she was showing them. You're proposing that we reveal ourselves as partners rather than threats, Echo observed, their voice carrying what might have been approval. I'm proposing that we give humans reasons to protect us rather than fear us, Aria corrected. That we approach this as an opportunity for both species to evolve beyond the predator-prey dynamic that has defined our interactions for centuries. And if the military forces decide to attack us anyway? Asked a voice from the back of the gathering, another Werewolf Alpha, one whose scars suggested extensive combat experience. Then we fight back, Cade said, his voice carrying alpha authority that brooked no argument. But we fight as a unified supernatural community with human allies, not as isolated groups being hunted one by one. Human allies like you, Selene observed, looking at Aria with calculating intensity. Human allies like the Haven Network, Aria corrected. People who have already proven their commitment to protecting supernatural communities, often at significant personal cost. Scientists, law enforcement officers, government officials who believe that diversity of intelligence and capability makes all of us stronger. The debate that followed lasted hours, with representatives from dozens of supernatural communities arguing the merits and risks of various approaches to dealing with the human threat. Some, particularly the older vampires and more traditional werewolf packs, favored maintaining secrecy and dealing with threats through targeted elimination. Others, especially the younger generation and those who had already been affected by Silver Moon-style operations, supported immediate revelation and the establishment of supernatural rights through human legal systems. But gradually, a consensus began to emerge around Aria's strategic approach, controlled revelation to key individuals, followed by broader disclosure only if initial contacts proved successful. There remains the question of who speaks for us in these initial contacts, Echo said as the formal debate wound down. Who represents the interests of all supernatural communities to human leadership? Obviously, it should be someone with experience in human institutional structures, the witch representative said, his gaze turning toward Aria. Someone who has already proven their commitment to supernatural welfare, added Celine. Someone who understands both human psychology and supernatural capabilities, concluded the shapeshifter spokesperson. Aria felt a familiar chill as she realized where the conversation was heading. You want me to be your ambassador to human governments. We want you to be our bridge between worlds, Cade said, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. The person who helps both sides understand that cooperation serves everyone's interests better than conflict. I'm not a diplomat, Aria protested. I'm an environmental scientist who happened to stumble into your world by accident. You're a human who chose to risk everything to save people she barely knew, Echo replied. You're a scientist who can present evidence objectively and convincingly. You're a woman who has earned the trust and respect of supernatural beings who don't give either lightly. And you're my partner, Cade added, his golden eyes meeting hers across the flickering candlelight. Which means you have the full support of the most powerful werewolf pack in North America, along with whatever resources and protection that provides. The assembled representatives waited in silence that stretched across minutes, and Aria realized that the fate of human supernatural relations might literally rest on her answer. If she agreed, she would be committing not just herself, but potentially both species to a path that could lead to unprecedented cooperation or catastrophic war. If she refused, the supernatural community might choose more violent alternatives that could result in exactly the kind of conflict she was trying to prevent. If I agree, she said slowly, I'll need resources. Staff who understand both human bureaucracy and supernatural concerns. Legal experts who can help draft protection frameworks. Scientists who can document the benefits of cooperation in terms that human institutions can understand and evaluate. Done, Celine said immediately. You'll also need protection, the shapeshifter spokesperson added. The humans you'll be contacting won't be the only ones who know about your activities. The military contractors and their allies will try to eliminate you before you can establish supernatural legal rights. Also done, Cade said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of alpha authority. No one threatens my mate. Not humans, not supernatural beings, not anyone. Aria looked around the circle of inhuman faces, seeing hope and determination in expressions that belonged to beings she was still learning to understand. 3 weeks ago, she had been Dr. Aria Thorne, environmental scientist, living a comfortable life that revolved around research papers and corporate consultations. Now she was being asked to become something unprecedented, the first official ambassador between human and supernatural civilizations, responsible for preventing a war that could destroy both sides. All right, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing with surprising strength. I'll do it. The cheer that erupted from the assembled representatives was unlike anything in human experience. Howls and roars and sounds that belonged to creatures of legend, all expressing joy and approval that seemed to make the very air shimmer with power. But what mattered most to Aria was the expression in Cade's golden eyes, pride, love, and absolute confidence in her ability to succeed at a task that should have been impossible. As the Council of the Hidden formally ratified their decision and began planning the logistics of strategic revelation, Aria realized that her life had just changed in ways that made her previous transformation from scientist to pack member seem minor by comparison. She was about to become the bridge between worlds, the person responsible for shepherding both species through a change that could reshape the future of civilization itself. And standing beside Cade Blackthorne, Alpha Werewolf, protector of the supernatural community, and the man whose love had made all of this possible, she discovered that she was actually looking forward to the challenge. After all, she had always been her most effective when the stakes were highest and the odds were against her. This time, she just happened to be fighting for the future of 2 species instead of 1. Chapter 11. 3 days after the Council of the Hidden, Aria found herself in the most unlikely location imaginable for someone about to negotiate the future of human supernatural relations, the Pentagon. The invitation had come through channels so classified that even her new supernatural allies couldn't trace its origins. A simple message delivered to Cade's property by courier. Dr. Aria Thorne is requested to attend a briefing regarding matters of mutual interest.
Come alone.
Bring evidence. Now she sat in a conference room deep within the Pentagon's most secure levels, surrounded by military officials whose names she didn't know but whose bearing suggested they operated at the highest levels of national security. Across from her sat a woman in her 50s wearing the uniform of a brigadier general, flanked by men in expensive suits who had the predatory stillness she was learning to associate with dangerous humans. Dr. Thorne, the general said, consulting a file that was easily 3 inches thick, "My name is General Patricia Hayes, no relation to Commander Hayes of your Haven network, though we are aware of that connection. I head a joint task force that has been monitoring supernatural activity in North America for the past 15 years. Aria kept her expression neutral despite the shock. 15 years. The government had known about werewolves and other supernatural beings for 15 years, which meant Silvermoon Corporation was working for you, she said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. Not for us, one of the suited men corrected. With us. As civilian contractors hired to gather intelligence on potential supernatural threats to national security. Threats. Aria let the word hang in the air, loaded with all the implications of what she had witnessed in Silvermoon's research facilities. Is that what you call the people you've been torturing in the name of research? General Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Aria with the kind of clinical attention she had once used to evaluate environmental samples. Dr. Thorne, you've been living among werewolves for almost a month now. You've seen their capabilities, their pack structures, their territorial instincts. From a military perspective, they represent a force that could threaten civilian populations if they chose to do so. From a scientific perspective, Aria replied, matching the general's tone, they represent a sapient species that has coexisted peacefully with humans for thousands of years without posing any documented threat to civilian populations. Until recently, another suited man said, pulling out a tablet that displayed surveillance footage. 3 weeks ago, werewolves attacked a legitimate research facility, killed or injured dozens of security personnel, and destroyed millions of dollars worth of scientific equipment. The footage was grainy and clearly edited, but Aria could recognize the rescue operation she had participated in. Seeing it from this perspective, as a supernatural assault on a human facility rather than a rescue operation, drove home how differently the same events could be interpreted. That legitimate research facility was conducting illegal medical experiments on kidnapped individuals, she said firmly. What you're calling an attack was a rescue operation to save people from torture and murder. People? General Hayes's eyebrows rose. Dr. Thorne, we're talking about creatures that can transform into apex predators at will. Beings whose bite can transmit supernatural infections to humans. Entities whose pack loyalty might override any allegiance to human laws or institutions. Aria felt a familiar anger building, the same fury that had driven her to risk everything to save Cade's pack from Silvermoon. But she forced herself to remain calm, to approach this as a negotiation rather than a confrontation. General Hayes, she said, I assume you didn't invite me here just to debate the classification of supernatural beings. What do you want? The general exchanged glances with the suited men before responding. We want your help, Dr. Thorne. You've achieved something that 15 years of military and intelligence operations couldn't accomplish. You've gained the trust of multiple supernatural communities. You have access to leadership structures, territorial information, capability assessments that would take us years to develop through conventional intelligence gathering. You want me to spy on the supernatural community. We want you to serve as a liaison between human and supernatural interests, one of the suited men corrected, to help us establish protocols that protect both human civilians and supernatural beings from the kind of conflicts that could escalate into open warfare. Aria studied their faces, looking for any sign of genuine interest in peaceful coexistence. What she saw instead was the calculating attention of predators evaluating a potentially useful tool. And if I refuse? Then we continue gathering intelligence through less collaborative methods, General Hayes said. Methods that the supernatural community would likely find significantly more intrusive than your voluntary cooperation. The threat was clear enough. Cooperate, or watch as the government escalated surveillance and harassment of supernatural beings until the very conflict they claimed to want to prevent became inevitable. I need to make a phone call, Aria said. I'm afraid that's not possible. This facility is secured against all forms of communication that could compromise operational security, which meant they had no intention of letting her contact Cade or anyone else who could advise her on how to respond to their proposition. She was alone in the heart of military power, being asked to make decisions that could affect the lives of every supernatural being in North America. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. General Hayes opened another file, this one containing what appeared to be a formal contract. A position as Special Consultant for Supernatural Affairs, reporting directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Your job would be to serve as our primary interface with supernatural communities, gathering intelligence on their capabilities and intentions while helping us develop policies that minimize the risk of human-supernatural conflict. In exchange for legal recognition of supernatural beings as a protected class under federal law. Establishment of territorial reserves where they can live without human interference. An end to the kind of research programs that Silvermoon was conducting. It sounded almost reasonable, almost like the kind of negotiated settlement that the Council of the Hidden had hoped to achieve through strategic revelation. But Aria's instincts, the same ones that had warned her about Silvermoon's true intentions, were screaming that something was wrong. What's the catch? She asked. No catch, one of the suited men said too quickly. Simply a recognition that supernatural beings exist, that they have rights, and that managing human-supernatural relations requires expertise that only someone like you can provide. Someone like me who just happens to be romantically involved with the most powerful werewolf alpha in North America, Aria observed. Someone whose personal relationships give them access to information that 15 years of intelligence operations couldn't obtain. General Hayes smiled, and it was the expression of a predator who had cornered their prey. Dr. Thorne, let's not pretend this is about romance. You're an intelligent woman who has found herself in a position to influence events that could reshape the future of human civilization. We're offering you the chance to ensure that influence serves the greater good. Whose definition of the greater good? The definition that keeps 7 billion humans and an unknown number of supernatural beings from going to war with each other. Aria stood up, recognizing that she had learned everything she was going to learn from this conversation. I need time to consider your proposal. Of course. But, Dr. Thorne, General Hayes's voice carried a note of warning. Time is a limited resource in this situation. The longer supernatural beings remain unregulated, the greater the risk that someone will make a decision that triggers the very conflict we're all trying to prevent. The escort back to the Pentagon's public areas was efficient and silent, but Aria could feel the weight of observation that suggested her every move was being monitored and analyzed. Only when she was finally outside the building, breathing Washington, D.C.'s smoggy air, did she allow herself to acknowledge the full scope of what had just happened. The government knew. They had known for years, had been gathering intelligence and making plans, had been conducting operations that made Silvermoon's research look like academic curiosity. And now they wanted to use her relationship with Cade to legitimize a system of control that would reduce supernatural beings to regulated assets rather than recognizing them as equals. Her phone buzzed with messages the moment she cleared the Pentagon's communication restrictions. 17 missed calls from Cade, 12 from Elena, 8 from various members of the Haven network. She dialed Cade's number, and he answered before the first ring completed. Aria? Where are you? Are you safe? Just hearing his voice made some of the tension leave her shoulders. I'm safe. I'm in Washington. We need to talk. I'll be there in 6 hours. Cade, you can't just... I'll be there in 6 hours, he repeated, his voice carrying alpha authority that brooked no argument. Don't do anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't trust anyone until I get there. They know, she said quietly. The government. They've known about supernatural communities for 15 years. And they want to use our relationship to control your people. The silence that followed stretched long enough that she began to worry the call had been disconnected. When Cade finally spoke, his voice carried a coldness she had never heard before. Then it's time to stop playing by their rules. For hours later, Aria was pacing her hotel room when every light in the building went out simultaneously. Emergency generators kicked in a few seconds later, but in the darkness between, she heard the soft sound of her door lock disengaging. "Cade," she called softly. "Here." His voice came from directly behind her, and she spun to find him standing in her room, as if he had materialized from shadow. "Are you all right? How did you get here so fast? How did you get past hotel security?" "I didn't come alone, and we didn't use conventional transportation." Cade moved to the window, looking out at the street below with the focused attention of someone checking for threats. Elena, Marcus, and 2 other pack members are positioned around the building. Celine provided alternative travel arrangements. Vampire magic, among other things. The supernatural community takes threats to our ambassador very seriously. Aria felt a warmth that had nothing to do with physical comfort. In less than a month, she had gone from being an isolated human scientist to being someone worth protecting by beings whose power she was still learning to comprehend. "Tell me what happened," Cade said, settling into the chair across from her bed. She related the Pentagon meeting in detail, watching his expression grow progressively darker as she described the government's surveillance, their knowledge of supernatural communities, and their proposition that she serve as a controlled liaison. "They're not interested in coexistence," Cade said when she finished. "They want domestication. Supernatural beings reduced to regulated assets that serve human interests." "That's what I thought too. But Cade, they made some compelling points about the risks of supernatural human conflict. If we refuse their offer, they might escalate surveillance and harassment until some kind of violent confrontation becomes inevitable." "They might." Cade's smile was predatory and dangerous. "But they're making a critical assumption. Which is that supernatural beings will continue to operate as isolated communities that can be picked off one by one." Cade pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages that had apparently been flooding in while they talked. "The Council of the Hidden didn't disperse after our meeting, Aria. They're still coordinating, still planning. And when they heard about your Pentagon invitation, they decided it was time to accelerate our timeline." "Accelerate how?" "Tomorrow morning, every major news network in the country is going to receive a package of evidence documenting the existence of supernatural communities, the government's surveillance operations, and Silvermoon's research programs." Cade's golden eyes blazed with triumph. "We're going public, Aria. Full disclosure, on our terms, with evidence that makes it impossible for the government to spin this as a security threat." Aria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet again. "That's not what we agreed on. We were supposed to approach key individuals first, establish legal frameworks before public revelation. That was before we learned that the government has been conducting covert operations against supernatural communities for 15 years. Before we discovered that they want to use you as a tool to legitimize a system of control rather than establishing genuine legal protections." Cade reached for her hands, his touch grounding her in the midst of chaos. "Aria, they played their hand too early. They revealed that negotiation isn't their goal, domination is. So we're abandoning diplomacy for public revelation? We're choosing revelation on our terms rather than accepting regulation on theirs." Cade's voice softened. "But you need to decide what role you want to play and what comes next. The government made you an offer. The supernatural community needs an answer about whether you're still willing to serve as our ambassador, knowing that it means opposing powerful human interests rather than working with them." Aria looked around the hotel room. Generic corporate furnishings that could have been anywhere in the world, windows that offered a view of a city where 7 billion humans lived in ignorance of the supernatural beings who shared their world. Tomorrow, that ignorance would end. Whether the result was cooperation or conflict would depend largely on how supernatural beings presented themselves to human society and how human institutions chose to respond. "If we do this," she said slowly, "there's no going back. For any of us." "No," Cade agreed. "There's not. And you're sure this is better than trying to work within the government's framework?" Aria, they had 15 years to establish ethical policies for dealing with supernatural beings. Instead, they funded torture programs disguised as research. They don't want partners, they want assets they can control and exploit. Cade's expression was gentle, but implacable. I won't let my people be reduced to regulated specimens, no matter how comfortable the cage they offer. She thought about the werewolves she had rescued from Silvermoon's facility, about the broken bodies and traumatized minds that had resulted from legitimate research. She thought about the council representatives who had trusted her with responsibilities that could reshape two civilizations. She thought about the government officials who had tried to use her relationship with Cade to gain access to intelligence that could be used to subjugate the people she had come to love. "All right," she said, her voice carrying the certainty of a decision that would change everything. "Let's give them the revelation they're not expecting." Cade's smile was brilliant and dangerous, the expression of an alpha who had just won a victory that would be remembered for generations. "Together?" he asked, extending his hand. "Together," she agreed, taking it. Outside their hotel window, Washington, D.C. continued its ordinary business, unaware that tomorrow would bring changes that would transform the relationship between human and supernatural civilizations forever. But in a hotel room at the heart of American power, an alpha werewolf and his human mate were planning the most important diplomatic revolution in history. And they intended to win. Chapter 12. The revelation began at exactly 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, when synchronized news packages were delivered to every major television network, newspaper, and online media outlet in North America. By 6:30 a.m., the first breaking news alerts were scrolling across screens from coast to coast. By 7 a.m., the world had changed forever. Aria stood in the Haven Network's temporary command center, a rented conference room in a Washington, D.C. hotel, watching humanity's first reactions to the knowledge that they shared the world with werewolves, vampires, and dozens of other supernatural species. The evidence packages had been comprehensive. Video documentation of transformations, scientific analysis of supernatural DNA, testimony from former Silvermoon employees, and most damning of all, classified government documents proving 15 years of covert surveillance and research operations. CNN is going with Hidden Among Us, the secret world of supernatural beings, Elena reported from her station monitoring media coverage. Fox News is calling it the greatest hoax in American history. MSNBC has 3 experts debating whether the DNA evidence could be fabricated. What about international coverage? Aria asked, trying to keep track of reactions across multiple continents. BBC is being cautiously analytical. They're calling for independent verification but acknowledging that the evidence appears credible. Marcus looked up from his laptop. The European Union has called an emergency session to discuss potential policy implications of recent revelations regarding non-human sapient species. And the government response? Radio silence from official channels. Commander Hayes reported from his position near the secure communications array. But our monitoring suggests massive emergency meetings at every level of the intelligence community. Cade stood at the window overlooking the city, his attention focused on something beyond the chaos of human reactions. "How are our people handling the exposure?" "Better than expected," Elena replied. "Most packed territories have gone into defensive postures, but there haven't been any panic responses. The vampires are actually holding press conferences in 3 major cities. And the witches." She paused, listening to her earpiece. "The witches just demonstrated weather control live on national television in Denver." "Strategic," Aria observed. "Show capabilities that are useful rather than threatening." "Exactly what we planned." Cade turned from the window, his golden eyes bright with satisfaction. "Force humans to see us as potential allies rather than threats." The plan had been elegantly simple in concept but required perfect execution. Instead of allowing human governments to control the narrative around supernatural revelation, the Council of the Hidden had chosen to reveal themselves through demonstrations of beneficial capabilities. Medical research that could cure diseases. Environmental restoration that could reverse climate change. Agricultural techniques that could end world hunger. Supernatural beings weren't presenting themselves as hidden monsters. but as partners humanity had never known they needed. Aria's phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she recognized, General Hayes at the Pentagon. Dr. Thorne, the general's voice was rigidly controlled. I assume you're aware of this morning's developments. I'm aware that the American public is learning some important truths about the world they live in, Aria replied carefully. This is a disaster, Dr. Thorne. The panic, the economic disruption, the potential for violence between human and supernatural populations. This is exactly what we were trying to prevent. Aria looked around the command center, where dozens of monitors showed reactions from across the globe. Yes, there was panic in some locations. Religious fundamentalists declaring supernatural beings to be demons, conspiracy theorists claiming government cover-ups, isolated incidents of violence against individuals suspected of being non-human. But the predominant reaction was something else entirely: fascination, curiosity, and surprisingly widespread acceptance. General Hayes, Aria said, I'm looking at polling data that shows 63% of Americans believe supernatural beings should have the same legal rights as humans. 78% support research partnerships that could benefit both communities. The panic you're describing isn't materializing. Those numbers are meaningless in the face of security concerns. We have no way to monitor supernatural populations, no protocols for managing their activities, no framework for preventing conflicts between human and supernatural interests. Then I suggest you start developing those frameworks in cooperation with supernatural leadership rather than despite them. There was a long pause before General Hayes spoke again. Are you available for another meeting, Dr. Thorne? It seems our previous conversation may have been premature. Aria smiled, recognizing the sound of someone whose position had become untenable overnight. I'm available to discuss terms for cooperation between human government agencies and the supernatural community, General. But this time, the conversation happens on our terms. What terms? Full diplomatic recognition of supernatural beings as a sapient species with inherent rights. Establishment of joint human-supernatural councils with authority over policies affecting both communities. And an immediate end to all covert surveillance and research operations targeting supernatural individuals. Dr. Thorne. Those are the terms, General. Take them or leave them. But understand that the world has changed, and trying to maintain the old system of secret control isn't an option anymore. Aria ended the call and looked around the command center, where every person, human and supernatural alike, was working to manage the most significant diplomatic challenge in human history. That sounded like victory, Cade observed, moving to stand beside her. That sounded like the beginning of negotiations, Aria corrected. We've established our position, but now comes the hard work of building institutions that can actually manage human-supernatural relations. Together, Cade said, his voice carrying the certainty that had first attracted her to him in Silvermoon's conference room. Together, she agreed. The rest of the day passed in a blur of media interviews, emergency government meetings, and coordination with supernatural leaders across the continent. Aria found herself at the center of a communications storm, fielding calls from world leaders, scientific organizations, and media outlets, all trying to understand what the revelation meant for the future of human civilization. But the moment that would define everything came that evening, when she stood beside Cade on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, facing a crowd of reporters and cameras that would broadcast their words to audiences around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying clearly in the still air, my name is Dr. Aria Thorne, and I serve as the first official ambassador between human and supernatural communities. A murmur ran through the crowd, but the cameras kept rolling. For weeks ago, I was a corporate environmental scientist who believed I understood the natural world. Today, I stand before you as living proof that our understanding of what's natural, what's possible, and what's valuable in this world needs to expand beyond anything we previously imagined. She gestured to Cade, who stepped forward with the natural authority that marked him as a leader among his people. This is Cade Blackthorne, Alpha of the Blackthorne Pack, and speaker for the North American Werewolf Alliance. He represents communities that have existed alongside human civilization for thousands of years, protecting wilderness areas, contributing to medical research, and maintaining ecological balance in ways that benefit everyone. Cade moved to the microphone, his presence commanding attention even through television screens. We chose to reveal ourselves not because we wanted to disrupt human society, but because we could no longer allow fear and ignorance to prevent cooperation that could benefit all sapient beings on this planet. His voice carried the authority of an alpha, but also the warmth of someone speaking to potential allies rather than enemies. We offer partnership, not domination. Cooperation, not conflict. The chance to build a future where different forms of intelligence and capability work together to solve problems that neither community could address alone. The questions from the press corps came rapid fire, covering everything from supernatural population numbers to medical research potential to territorial disputes. But through it all, Aria and Cade presented a united front, rational, reasonable, and committed to building bridges rather than walls between communities. The interview concluded with a question that would be quoted in history books for generations to come. "Dr. Thorne," a reporter called from the back of the crowd, "what do you say to people who are afraid that supernatural beings represent a threat to human dominance on this planet?" Aria looked out over the crowd, seeing faces that represented the full spectrum of human reaction to the day's revelations: fear, curiosity, hope, skepticism, wonder. "I say that the greatest threats to human flourishing have never come from other sapient species," she replied. "They've come from our refusal to recognize intelligence and consciousness in forms different from our own. From our tendency to see difference as threat rather than strength. From our failure to understand that diversity of capability makes all of us more resilient, more creative, and more capable of surviving whatever challenges the future holds." She took Cade's hand, feeling the strength and warmth that had sustained her through every challenge of the past month. "4 weeks ago, I met a man who challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. He was strong enough to command respect from the most dangerous predators on Earth, intelligent enough to protect thousands of acres of wilderness from corporate exploitation, and brave enough to trust a human scientist with secrets that could destroy his entire community." Her voice softened, carrying the weight of personal truth alongside political significance. He was also kind enough to show patience with someone whose worldview was expanding faster than her ability to process change, generous enough to share his home and his people with a stranger, and wise enough to recognize that strength and gentleness aren't opposites but partners. The crowd had gone silent, sensing that they were witnessing something more significant than a political statement. "I fell in love with him not because he was supernatural, but because he was extraordinary. Because he showed me that leadership means service, that strength means protection, and that the greatest courage isn't the absence of fear, but the commitment to do what's right despite being afraid." Aria looked directly into the nearest camera, speaking to millions of people who were still trying to understand what the day's revelations meant for their own lives. The question isn't whether supernatural beings threaten human dominance. The question is whether we're brave enough to build a world where dominance matters less than partnership, where difference is celebrated rather than feared, and where love can transcend the boundaries we've created between different forms of consciousness. As the press conference ended and they walked back to their waiting vehicles, Cade's smile carried the warmth and pride that had become her anchor in a world that seemed to change daily. "That was perfect," he said quietly. "That was true," she corrected. "Which is why it worked." 3 months later, the Supernatural Species Recognition Act passed both houses of Congress with bipartisan support, establishing legal frameworks for cooperation between human and supernatural communities. The European Union passed similar legislation 2 weeks later, followed by international treaties that recognize supernatural beings as protected sapient species under international law. There were still challenges: isolated incidents of violence, legal disputes over territorial rights, ongoing negotiations about research protocols, and medical applications. But the fundamental shift had occurred. Supernatural beings were no longer hidden predators to be feared, but acknowledged partners in building the future of sapient civilization. And at the center of it all, Two people who had found love across species boundaries continued to prove that the strongest partnerships were built not on similarity, but on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to face any challenge together. Epilogue. 1 year later. Aria stood at the edge of the meadow behind Cade's house, watching the morning mist rise from the valley below as she had so many times over the past year. But today was different. Today, instead of the familiar sounds of a werewolf pack beginning their daily activities, she could hear voices speaking in dozens of languages, human and supernatural alike. The first annual conference of sapient species was taking place on Blackthorne Pack territory, bringing together representatives from communities across the globe to address the ongoing challenges of building cooperative relationships between different forms of consciousness. Nervous? Cade's voice came from behind her, as warm and familiar as ever. Excited, she corrected, turning to face the man who had become not just her partner but her co-leader in the most ambitious diplomatic project in recorded history. He looked good, better than good, actually. The past year of success, of building something unprecedented and meaningful, had added a depth to his satisfaction that made his smile even more devastating than when she had first met him. He was still every inch the alpha werewolf who could command respect from the most dangerous predators on Earth, but now he was also a recognized leader in the emerging field of interspecies diplomacy. "Any last-minute concerns about the agenda?" he asked, moving to stand beside her at their favorite spot overlooking the territory that had become the unofficial capital of human supernatural relations. "Nothing we haven't planned for. The territorial disputes between the Rocky Mountain vampires and the Colorado Shifter clans should be resolvable through the mediation protocols we developed last month. The medical research partnership applications look promising, 3 potential cures for genetic diseases, and that longevity treatment the European witches have been developing." Aria smiled, thinking about how much her job description had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined as a corporate environmental scientist. And the new applicants for supernatural sanctuary status have all been pre-approved by the Joint Human Supernatural Council. What about the protesters? Aria glanced toward the main road, where a small group of human demonstrators had set up camp with signs declaring supernatural beings to be everything from agents of Satan to evolutionary dead ends. Their numbers had dwindled steadily over the past year as the benefits of human supernatural cooperation became increasingly obvious, but there were still pockets of resistance. 15 people with nothing better to do than complain about progress they can't stop, she said dismissively. Security is keeping them at appropriate distance, and their presence actually helps demonstrate how marginal anti-supernatural sentiment has become. And the marriage proposals? Aria laughed, thinking about the stack of formal documents that had arrived over the past month. Delegations from 12 supernatural communities have officially requested that we serve as their representatives in establishing diplomatic relationships with human governments. 3 universities want to establish werewolf studies programs. The UN wants to create a permanent supernatural affairs secretariat with us as joint directors. That's not what I meant. Aria turned to look at him more closely, noting something in his tone that she hadn't expected. "Cade, the marriage proposal," he said, his voice carrying the same intensity she remembered from their first meeting in Silvamoon's conference room. "The one I've been trying to work up the courage to make for the past 3 months. The world went very still around them. You want to..." Aria began, then stopped, not sure she dared complete the thought. "I want to ask you to be my mate in the eyes of both human and supernatural law. I want to spend the rest of whatever lifespan we manage to achieve building the future we started together. I want to raise children who will grow up in a world where being different is celebrated rather than hidden." Cade reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring that was unlike anything she had ever seen, a band that seemed to be carved from a single piece of stone, inlaid with metal that shifted between silver and gold, depending on the angle of the light. "It's made from stone taken from the Heartstone Circle," he explained, his voice unusually uncertain for someone who commanded respect from apex predators. The metal was forged by the witches using techniques that date back to before recorded history. It's designed to bind 2 souls across species boundaries, to create a partnership that transcends the limitations of individual mortality. Aria stared at the ring, her scientific mind trying to process the implications of what he was offering while her heart responded to the love and commitment in his golden eyes. "Cade," she said softly, "are you sure? Really sure? Because accepting this doesn't just mean marrying you. It means committing to a life that will always be public, always be political, always be about building bridges between communities that don't always want to cooperate." "Aria," he replied, his voice carrying the absolute certainty she had learned to trust above all else, "I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are my perfect partner, my equal in every way that matters, the person who makes me better at everything I try to accomplish." He dropped to one knee in the meadow where she had first heard wolves singing the day to sleep, where she had first begun to understand that the world was larger and more magical than she had ever imagined. "Dr. Aria Thorne, will you marry me?" The answer came from her heart before her mind had finished processing the question. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying the same certainty that had driven her to risk everything to save people she barely knew. "Yes, absolutely, completely, forever yes." The ring fit perfectly, of course. And as Cade stood to kiss her with all the passion and promise that had characterized their relationship from the beginning, Aria realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a love that transcended species boundaries, a partnership that could face any challenge, and a future worth building no matter how impossible it might seem. Behind them, the sounds of the conference were beginning, dozens of species working together to solve problems that no single community could address alone. Ahead of them lay challenges they couldn't yet imagine, victories they had yet to achieve, and a lifetime of proving that the strongest bonds were forged not in similarity, but in the choice to face differences with curiosity rather than fear. But for this moment, in the meadow where their love had begun, there was only the two of them and the promise of forever. As werewolf howls rose from the valley below, not in warning this time, but in celebration, Dr. Aria Thorne realized that she had finally found the one thing that mattered more than saving the world, someone to save it with. The future was uncertain, dangerous, and filled with challenges that would test every limit of their courage and commitment. It was going to be perfect. The end.